highlight the work of an organisation in my community which is doing something truly extraordinary in Victoria. The organisation is St Kilda Mums. Like the very best organisations, St Kilda Mums started out with one very simple idea. That is rehoming the essential items for mums and bubs to help every kid in my community get the very best start in life. Now, from this simple and very organic community organisation has grown something that is truly extraordinary. Every year now, thousands and thousands and thousands of mums and bubs who are going through a really tough time have help. It might be families experiencing extreme poverty, homelessness, family violence. But what this organisation does is take prams and cots and baby gear from one mum who doesn't need it anymore and gives it to these families in need. The work of this organisation is done with so much love and care. Their warehouse right in the heart of my electorate in Clayton is today something truly amazing to behold. It is an enormous space which is just chock full of the goods that amazing people around Victoria have donated to this organisation. So to every volunteer who helps St Kilda Mums, to the founder of this organisation, Jessie, to everyone who has supported them on their journey, I want to say thank you. By 2030, St Kilda Mums wants to support every Victorian child who needs their help, and I, as their local member, are with them 100% of the way. Speaker, I want to highlight the work of an organisation in my electorate which has been serving our community tirelessly for 50 years, and that is South East Community Links, based in Springvale. This organisation has been supporting thousands and thousands of migrants around the clock since its inception decades ago. The organisation has grown with the community that it supports. It supports L-platers who come from a non-English speaking background to get their licence. It helps by providing emergency relief to people who are struggling. They support women who are escaping from family violence and many people in my community on immigration matters. And it's a huge point of pride for me to have had really a very long association with this organisation pre my time in Parliament. SECL was founded by my mentor, Mel Mitchell. Whenever people ask me who my idol is, I always point to Mel and her husband, Eric. These were two very rare advocates who sadly have both passed away now. They had their home in Springvale, and when these waves upon waves of migration came into our local area, Mel and Eric were there to help them. I'm overjoyed that a community program has now been named in Mel's honour. Partnering with local schools, this program helps young people develop practical life skills that they might not otherwise pick up in a classroom. I was really pleased to visit Hampton Park Secondary College recently to launch this program, and having known Mel myself, I know she'd be so proud of what the Mel program will achieve with these extraordinary young people in Melbourne's South East.
I thank the member for Hotham. I call the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On the 1st of June this year, student debt, or HECS help debt, was indexed at 3.9%. Last year, this figure was 0.6%. According to the Australian Tax Office, Australians are now saddled with $68.7 billion in student debt. But $68.7 billion can sound like a very abstract figure. What does that dollar value mean for someone currently pursuing higher education? The higher indexation rate means that the average increase this year to an Australian student debt is just shy of $1,000. For decades, young people have been told that they need a tertiary education, be it through TAFE or university. In this place only yesterday, we heard about the skill requirements for the jobs of the future and the ever-increasing necessity that higher education plays in attaining a place in the workforce. My electorate of Brisbane is home to many higher education institutions and to one of the youngest populations of any federal electorate. I've had many conversations and received countless emails from students and graduates detailing the struggles they are facing while at university and post-graduation in servicing student debt. Countless people are now finding themselves in a situation where they are not able to pay down their debt faster than it is accruing. This is a complete failure of our education and economic systems. Students are expected to dedicate 40 hours a week to their studies. They are also expected to undertake internships, complete 40-hour-a-week placements in order to graduate, hold down a job that pays just enough to put a roof over their head and 2-minute noodles on the table. And after all of these sacrifices, they still end up with at least $35,000 in student debt. With the cost of living spiralling out of control, rent stress escalating, and inflation set to rise even higher, young people and students are going to be punished even further for trying to receive an education and fill the skills shortage we are experiencing in this country. Government can make people's lives easier. We can accept education as a public good. We can cancel student debt. Looking around the world, countries such as Germany, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark and France have made higher education free. New Zealand has adopted a policy of 1 year fee-free higher education. Even the United States, only last week, has taken steps to cancel up to $20,000 of student debt. Once again, Australia is left playing catch-up. We must take steps to address the financial burden that receiving an education places on people in this country. We must cancel student debt.
I thank the member for Brisbane, and I call the member for Chifley. The Honourable Minister has the call.
I'm happy to defer. Oh, no, I'm happy to follow the Deputy Speaker's lead. Deputy Speaker, on Saturday night, I had the chance to do something I haven't done for a while, which is to attend a debutante ball. In this case, it was organised by Buddha Carbon, a not-for-profit First Nations community group doing tremendous work in the Chifley electorate, and I'm proud of my long-standing relationship with that group, and even prouder of the dedication of Auntie Jenny Beale and Uncle Jack Gibson. It was a pleasure to accept their invite to the NAIDOC debutante ball representing the Prime Minister. Debutante balls might seem pretty old school, but I've got to say I love the way that Buddha Carbon have basically taken the concept on, using as a platform to celebrate young First Nations people, bringing the community together and teaching a few handy skills along the way. No doubt there are a few of the young fellas there learning how to dance much better, and there's also a dressmaking program to learn how to design and sew. And it has also been good to see incorporation in particular of First Nations culture within that as well. And for anyone that's interested in learning more, Nakia Louie and Miranda Tapsell did a whole podcast series talking about not just this debutante ball, but the way that it's been used by First Nations communities to celebrate their young. And I just want to congratulate them on that, and also on the message that Minister Burney provided in a speech through video to commend the debutantes as the federal government seeks to enshrine in the Constitution Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament. So well done to them. I also wanted to use the opportunity to recognise some of the great work being done by sporting clubs in our area. The Blacktown City Football Club won the grand final for the New South Wales Men's National Premier League. Huge effort from a high-performing team to deliver another great result. I wanted to congratulate local Melissa Wu, who took out gold at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, which now makes it her third Commonwealth Games gold medal. A tremendous effort. Finally, I also want to give a shout out to Ian and Taylor Wilson from the Plumpton Braves Baseball Club. 20 years of service to the club, a tremendous effort. They've been incredibly hard workers for the community, and I'm pleased to see both the Lakota and Omaha teams make it past the semi-final rounds. Go Braves. I also proudly display a Plumpton Braves baseball in the office, and it is terrific to see community champions like the Taylors do their work, and to all the sports clubs in our area who enrich our community life. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
I thank the Honourable Minister, and I call the member for Canning.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Saturday, September 3 was an important day for the people of Australia and my electorate of Canning. We celebrated National Flag Day, honouring the 121st anniversary of the day our flag was first flown. National Flag Day has a special significance for the people in my district. Annie Dorrington, one of the winners of Prime Minister Edmund Barton's flag competition, was a long-time resident of Serpentine, right in the heart of Canning. Since that day in September 1901, this national flag alone has symbolised our national character. It has been raised by Australian troops over battlefields for well over a century. It's the flag that flew over HMAS Sydney after her 1914 victory over the German warship SMS Emden. It was flown by diggers at Gallipoli and was raised at Pozières. There was only one Australian national flag raised at Kokoda after it was recaptured. Only one flag was hand-stitched in Changi Prison and kept hidden from the Japanese by Captain Strawbridge MBE in a calico bag inside his pillow. That flag was a symbol of hope for Australian prisoners of war and was raised over the gates of the camp when it was liberated in 1945. Australian Defence Force personnel have proudly worn it on operations over the last 20 years. One of my SAS patrol commanders, Adam, carried our flag beneath his body armour on every combat mission that the Australian government deployed him on. It was a reminder to him of whom he was serving, the Australian people, our values and our interests. I'm proud of the Australian flag and what it represents. It's the only flag that I wore on my left shoulder in the Australian Defence Force. It's the only flag that I was prepared to fight and die for in operations, and it's the only flag that I serve as a Commonwealth parliamentarian. For new Australians, it's the flag they have chosen to stand under. Many migrants have fled war-torn, impoverished countries to seek a better life here in Australia. And just look at the pride with which the member for Fowler wore the flag yesterday. She can attest to the fact that the flag binds new Australians to the rest of us. It's a symbol of aspiration and unity that has flown now for more than a century. But not for some members of Labor, the Greens and the Teals. The Greens are, of course, ashamed of our national flag. The member for Melbourne hides it in his press conferences. And Labor and the Teals are confused, posting on social media images of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island flags on our National Flag Day. The member for Kooyong even claimed we have 3 national flags. I have no issue with those flags. They are proud symbols full of meaning for our Indigenous Australians, but they are not our national flag. And so, Deputy Speaker, I hope the Australian national flag makes us all feel a sense of gratitude for this country and a responsibility to preserve it. That's why I serve in Parliament and why we must work together under one flag to defend the things that we love. Thank you.
Member for Canning, and I call the member for Perth.
Thank you, Deputy. Centre in Western Australia is slowly becoming a reality, something that we built in the heart of Perth. It's been discussed for decades. It was a vision that many governments have had, but I'm pleased that it is now being delivered upon. The Albanese government has committed $52 million to make this project a reality, partnering with the state government, who are delivering $50 million. We're working to share the oldest stories on Earth. The centre's design will be world-class, a unique feature for the Perth electorate and a tourism asset for all Australians. Between Matagarup, known as Harrison Island, and Katakumba, Kings Park, it will be a landmark for Perth. The site's location was recently announced by myself and the Premier of Western Australia following considerable consultation. I want to thank the Wadjuk Cultural Authority representative group who did the hard work consulting on the site that was chosen, the Terrace Road car park. This is one of the best sites in all of Western Australia. It will be something with which we can all be proud. This centre will be Western Australia's answer to the Opera House. It will draw tourists from across the world. I call on every member in this place to support this project, and I call on corporate Australia to show their support with donations towards the building and maintenance of this amazing cultural facility. Speaking of amazing pieces of Western Australian culture, from humble beginnings in 1968, the Channel 7 Perth Telethon has become an annual charity extravaganza. The first was described as chaotic. 1968 had the chaos of the Perth Telethon, 1969 had the chaos of Woodstock. The chaos of the 1968 telethon was chaos of a studio opened to the public for the first time, the chaos of a live broadcast with children everywhere, the chaos that came when for the first time they were taking donations in decimal currency. But from that chaos came beauty. The Perth Telethon is now the highest donating telethon per capita in the world, surpassing a mammoth $475 million in 2021, supporting 97 charity beneficiaries. Each of these beneficiaries is dedicated to children's health and wellbeing. This year it will be bigger than ever on 22 and 23 October. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be there. My good friend, the Lord Mayor of the City of Perth, Basil Zemplis, will be hosting, and Western Australians will be there in force. Wellington Street and RSC Arena will be the host, and this will be Western Australia at its best, supporting one another, building a better future. I was recently able to say thank you to the team who make Telethon a reality. I extend also that thanks to the leadership of Richard Goyder, Mr Kerry Stokes and the trustees of Telethon. And most importantly, I thank the people of Western Australia for their generous donations.
I thank the member for Perth. The member for Moore has the call.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Improving access to quality and affordable childcare for families in my electorate is one of my priorities. In government, the Coalition lifted the $10,560 limit on the childcare subsidy, making it easier for parents to return to work or take up more hours. This benefited an estimated 18,000 families in more. This change predominantly supports women who represent the majority of primary carers by reducing childcare costs and giving parents more flexibility around their working arrangements. By securing federal grants, several early learning centres in my electorate have recently benefited from capital improvements, including new nature play areas at the Mullaloo Community Kindergarten, Devalia Primary School, the Callaloo Threes Playgroup, the Padbury Primary School, delivered through the Stronger Communities program. However, a number of childcare centres in my electorate still have unmet needs for maintenance and upgrades. I recently visited the Padbury Community Kindergarten and the Marmion Avenue Community Childcare Centre at the invitation of members of their respective communities to discuss applying for funding to help maintain and upgrade their current facilities. The Padbury Community Kindergarten has been operating at its current premises for 40 years. The ageing building requires significant upgrades to ensure the children have access to a modern learning environment. This includes upgrades to the outdoor play area, classroom facilities, additional storage, and essential building maintenance. I look forward to working with the committee, the City of Joondalup, and the WA State Government to secure the necessary funding to upgrade the kindergarten and provide modern facilities. Similarly, the Marmion Avenue Community Childcare Centre in Corinne has a range of fantastic facilities that allow the children to thrive in their learning environment. As a not-for-profit organisation, the centre is seeking federal funding to establish a community garden, build a storage shed, and upgrade the playground. I look forward to working with the committee to secure the necessary funding for the centre to service the childcare needs of the Korean community. Providing more affordable and accessible childcare will assist working parents in my electorate to minimise the cost of living, return to work and be productive members of the workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. Call the member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge that the East Lismore Hockey Club are celebrating their 75th year this year. They were formed in the late 1940s and they formed a breakaway hockey team to enter the Far North Coast Reserve Grade competition, and the women's side joined a year later. Today, Easties, as they are known, is one of the strongest clubs in the Far North Coast competition. Several current and former members have played for Australia, including former Kookaburra Grant Smith, who won bronze at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. To celebrate their 75th year, they all had games from junior level to seniors, and reserves in both men and women played on their home field in Gunnellabar on the 5th and 6th of August. They called it the Festival of the Easties. They have had many contributors to hockey in the region, with the standout being Clint Mallett, who was inducted as a life member into the Far North Coast Hockey Incorporated for his work on and off the field, particularly for his role in 1987 as the founding secretary of the Far North Coast Hockey Incorporated. Congratulations to East Lismore Hockey Club and the current committee of President Daniel Hughes, Secretary Sonia Buchanan, Treasurer Joe Mackley, Vice President Andrew Helmwood, June Blund, Clint Mallett, Roxanne Tickle and Demi Flynn, and Jane Parrish. And thank you for the great community club that you are. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the grand final winners from the weekend in the Seniors Rugby League competition. In the North Coast Group 2 Rugby League competition, grand final was played on Sunday. And with great delight, I can say that the South Grafton Rebels played the Urara Valley Axemen, and the Rebels came out on top 36-8. Great win. Congratulations. They're coached by Ronald Gordon. So to the team, Kieran Heron, Luke French, Nick McGrady, Tom McGrady, Brian Quinlan, Huey Stanley, Jordan Gallagher, Lewis Cooper, Cooper Makings, Jack Pitkin, TJ Walker, Grant Brown, Grant Stevens, Ryan Binge, Luke Walker, Tyrris Brown and Ozzie Cooper, and Damon Kirby, Waylon Caldwell and Keaton Stark. Congratulations. Interesting fact here, Deputy Speaker, the Yarra Valley Maximum, while they missed out on grand final day, they were the minor premierships and are coached by former NRL player Sam Burgess, who came to the club after retiring from the NRL in 2019. And he helped to resurrect the Axemen. He built the team, they won a minor premiership, they energised new fans, had great crowds there all year, and had a great community spirit. So I congratulate him and the team for that. And the team, Liam Dunn, Ronan Singleton, Luke Beaumont, Lathan Hutchinson Waters, Stephen Ketnich, Buddy Hart, Dan Robinson, Kane Bunt, Zach Makelum, Matt Wakefield, Ryan Gill, Macaulay Dawson, Justin Hull, Jediah Cattell, Harry Davey, Vikram Atwell, Oscar Watson, Alex Bunt and Jared Hall. Great game. Well done, the Rebels.
Thank you to the member for Page, and I call the member for Hindmarsh.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd like to take the opportunity today to acknowledge the recipients of this year's Hindmarsh Electorate Volunteer Awards and their extraordinary contributions to our community. Alicia and Sophie Stefanov, who volunteer for the Bulgarians Educational and Friendly Society in events and dance teaching. Mimi Francesca is the driving force behind the Society's annual festival, and Ivan Nevov, a valued member for over 20 years. Adele Balin, the membership coordinator at the Port Community Arts Centre at only 16 years of age. Nancy Seller-Clark and Margaret McAvoy, dedicated parishioners of St Margaret's Anglican Church, Woodville, for many, many years. Anne McCutcheon and Richard Nolan, talented volunteer gardeners behind the beautiful gardens of the Charles Sturt Memorial Museum. Andrew Seeger and John Capel are valued members of Chats Inc., described as a beacon of possibility and a local gem. Graham Irish and Dennis Arnold of the Grange Lawn Tennis Club, who garden, maintain the course and cook barbecues for social tennis at that club. Tony Milliken and Sophie Molnar are the hearts behind Heart and Soul, a terrific food relief group assisting over 3,000 people every week. Diane Burrows, Trevor Thomas and Leonie Armbruster are committed volunteers assisting at the Largs Bay RSL at every opportunity. Mark Dacre and Dragon O'Curak of the Lions Club of Charles Sturt, giving their time without reservation and with second-to-none enthusiasm. Thomas Garland and Dorothy Dulwood are volunteers at the National Railway Museum, always willing to help and always with a smile. Maria Damasi and Nancy Kalako, volunteers of Nonna's Cucina for the last 5 years, bringing traditional family recipes, laughter and love. Thomas Krisnarik and Carolyn Griffiths from the Port Adelaide Obedience Dog Club are valuable senior instructors, and Rita Beer is the club's chief instructor and behind its success today. Linda Fisk and Anna Kemp, co-founders of Seeds of Affinity, advocating for criminalised women and supporting their transition from prison into the community. Julie Meadows, who works tirelessly at the Semaphore Port Adelaide RSL and started the Purple Circle teaching sewing and art. Mariana Borman and Sharon Sharp from Whale Dolphin Conservation Australia. Their photographs and observations are incredibly valuable to the dolphin rangers. Eileen Darley and Catherine Fitzgerald of the Port Adelaide Artists Forum, delivering the Beggars Banquet, an event that provides insight into the lives of those who are doing it tough. Sue Hogan, an invaluable life member of the Woodville Lacrosse Club, which she's been a part of for close to 50 years. And the volunteers of St Paul's Anglican Church, Russell Ford, Barbara Pearce, Fiona Winter, Mary Maul and Tom Bunworth, who I'm all told all go above and beyond their work. Hindmarsh is richly blessed with its volunteers.
I thank the member for Hindmarsh. Call the member for New England.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, I just want to touch on something that's been incredibly important, and that is the price of power and the problems it's causing. And intertwined with that, of course, is the advent of renewables in the form of solar panels and wind farms. This is dividing our districts. I went to a meeting the other day, and amongst the speakers were people from the Nationals, from the Greens, from the Labor Party and from Liberals, all saying we do not want our area turned into an industrial park. This is something that we feel is incredibly unfair because people in the city areas don't have to deal with wind farms and don't have to deal with solar panels, but in the town of Walcott, they're about to have 550 placed around the town, turning the town into an industrial landscape. What the issue is with that, of course, is that it comes with an implied contingent liability that if these things become moved on by irrelevant by reason of technology, which because it's static capital and racing technology, then the farmers will probably be responsible or have to be responsible for pulling them down. Unlike coal mines where money has to be put into a trust for a rehabilitation, that is not the case with wind farms. And so people say, well, why is it that they're not at Manly, they're not at Bellevue Hill, they're not at Toorak, but we have to have them here scattered all over our land? Why once more are we the source of assuaging a sort of the moral issues pertinent to climate change in our areas, but other people don't have to wear it? We have to wear the industrial landscape, they get the benefit of feeling good. Now, it's obviously the thing that's going to put them out of date very quickly is small modular reactors. Small modular reactors at 77 megawatts, that's 77,000 kilowatts. It takes about 2 to 3 kilowatts to run a house. So that's about 25,000 homes, or about 65,000 people for something that is approximately 20 metres high and 2.7 metres wide. Now, that takes the place of 70 or 80 wind towers. So as these come in, you won't be able to stop them because the world's moving on. It'll be like the power iPhones. They're going to arrive here and we're going to have to deal with it. And who's responsible for now what we're doing, castigating the land with wind farms that ultimately are going to be out of date? Today in the chamber, the Prime Minister said, oh, well, don't bring a lump of uranium in here. You brought a lump of coal in, don't bring a lump of uranium. It just goes to show people's ignorance. Uranium-235 in its natural form, when it's dug up, is about 0.7% radioactivity. And unless you're intending to eat it or break it down with nitric acid and inject it, it's not going to kill you. In fact, it's quite safe.
I thank the member for New England. I call the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to share some welcome news for my constituents in the Central Highlands municipality that sits within my electorate. Just before the election, the Central Highlands General Practice announced its closure, affecting hundreds of mainly elderly residents in the small town of Ouse, which is 88 kilometres northwest of Hobart. A replacement GP service folded within a few weeks, and for a couple of months now the town has been without a GP. Residents have had to travel long distances at considerable expense to access basic medical services and renew their prescriptions. There have been public meetings and a number of stakeholder meetings between myself and many others, including Primary Health Tasmania, HR Plus and local Mayor Louise Triffitt. The Tasmanian Government has, to its credit, played a significant role in offering accommodation and support services such as IT and the resources of the Tasmanian Health Service. Every level of government, local, state and federal, along with community members and medical practitioners and advocates, have been working tirelessly towards an ongoing solution. And today I'm pleased to be able to tell the House that medical services are set to resume for Ouse patients from October 10. For the remainder of this year, medical services will be available from Bothwell, 47 kilometres from Ouse, but it is hoped that some services will resume in Ouse itself early next year. The new arrangements follow an agreement being reached between the Tasmanian Health Service and Dr Mary Lumsden, who runs both Bothwell Doctors and Brighton Regional Doctors. Dr Lumsden has agreed to engage more GPs at her Bothwell clinic, meaning she can add Ouse patients and other Central Highlands patients to the books. I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank Dr Lumsden, who I have met a number of times over the years and who I have the highest regard for her willingness to expand her service and take the risk, and for her ongoing dedication to the health and well-being of southern Tasmanians. I would also like to thank Mayor Triffitt, who has been a tireless campaigner for the restoration of medical services to her community. Now, I don't pretend that this is a perfect fix, nor that it will be what the Ouse community wants for the long term, but it does at least restore some level of medical service, giving us breathing room to investigate what might be a better long-term solution. The fact is, Deputy Speaker, the model of rural and regional health that has been in place for decades across Australia is failing. GP recruitment is down and retention is woeful. People living in the regions are not getting the services they expect and have a right to, because the system is based on commercial viability for health providers and not healthcare and health outcomes. Our regions need a different model, and I am engaged in regular discussions with leading stakeholders about what that change might look like and how it might be delivered.
Thank you. Member for Lyons. In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. Clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 1, Fair Work Amendment, Paid Family and Domestic Violence Leave Bill 2022, resumption of debate on the second reading.
Question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the second reading of the bill. I had the opportunity to speak on a motion on the principle of paid family and domestic violence leave that was moved by the member for Paterson from memory in the last sitting week, and so I won't revisit the comments I made in the chamber regarding my support for the principle. But the substance of this bill within that principle is, of course, enshrining in the National Employment Standards something that's been established through a Fair Work Commission decision recently regarding paid rather than unpaid family and domestic violence leave. So we had the Fair Work Commission undertake a inquiry back in 2018. Well, they handed down the decision in March 2018, as they do when it comes to those that are on an award. Around about 2 million Australians, from memory as the most recent data indicates, are on some form of award. And the Fair Work Commission made a decision in March 2018 that a leave entitlement should be created for everyone on an award, which was that they would have up to 5 days unpaid family and domestic violence leave per annum, and that would be enshrined in the award. And they also decided that they would undertake a process over the subsequent few years to consider taking that decision further, which was to make the principle from unpaid to paid, and also whether or not the initial decision around 5 days was correct. When the 2018 decision around unpaid leave was made under the previous government, we made the decision to enshrine that principle into the National Employment Standards. Because, of course, if we hadn't done that, the Fair Work Commission's decision would have only applied to people on an award. And whilst people on an award, of course, should have that entitlement, it just goes to, it's a logical extension that every worker should have that entitlement, whether or not they're on an award. And of course, the National Employment Standards applies to all employees, and we made the decision to extend the Fair Work Commission's creation of that entitlement to apply to everyone. And that was universally welcomed, and business in particular, at the time. So what this bill is now doing is following exactly the same principle that we undertook after the 2018 decision, because, of course, more recently, the Fair Work Commission completed their process that they outlined in the March 2018 decision to look at whether or not they would expand the entitlement to become paid rather than unpaid, and also whether or not the 5-day period would be adjusted, and their decision for those on an award was to indeed make it paid, and also to increase the entitlement from 5 days to 10 days. So what we're now doing is putting this, again like we did 3 years ago, into the National Employment Standards, so that that entitlement that those on an award now have is applied to all employees by virtue of enshrining it in the National Employment Standards. So I'm very supportive of that principle, of course, in contributing to the motion around family paid domestic violence leave at last sitting week in the House. I made the point of how vital it was that we are doing everything we can to support people in that horrible, terrible, disgraceful situation of being victims of family and domestic violence, and we wouldn't ever want someone to feel, because of their employment circumstance, that they couldn't leave such a situation, have the time they needed to put themselves in a safe place and a safe position because of fear of losing income or having some kind of repercussion for them through their employment. So I commend the Fair Work Commission for the work they've done in this space, both in the 2018 and 2021 decisions. I think this is an excellent outcome for the fight that we all have a bipartisan approach towards, which is to trying to stamp out the scourge of family and domestic violence wherever we can. I think this principle will go another step towards achieving that. I commend it to the House.
I thank the member for Sturt, and I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on the family and domestic violence leave. At the last sitting of Parliament, a vigil was held outside of Parliament by women's safety advocates to mark the day where a workplace right for domestic violence victims moved closer to becoming law. Tulips were laid in memory of those who have lost their lives to family violence. I know that many members of this House attended the vigil. It was very well attended. Later that day, as the Minister for Industrial Relations introduced the legislation for 10 days of paid leave for victims of family violence, advocates stood and clapped. This has been a long, long journey for so many Australians, so many touched by the scourge of domestic and family violence. We know that there is no single answer to overcoming the scourge of domestic and family violence, but we also know that family and domestic violence is preventable. We know the policy response needs to be multifaceted. It must come from strong leadership, from government, from business, especially from business, from the unions who do so much to make our workplaces better, and most importantly from the community and from individuals. It is only fitting that an Albanese Labor government is showing leadership by making this bill one of the first pieces of legislation tabled in our first sitting week of the 47th Parliament. Currently, more than a third of Australian workers already have access to paid domestic violence leave, but making the entitlement a universal one will save lives. Anyone who works with victims and survivors of domestic and family violence will tell you that the most dangerous time for a woman is when she is leaving a violent relationship. It often takes a very long time to get to that breaking point where a woman is able to leave. Domestic violence is about control, and perpetrators go to extreme lengths to ensure that their victim does not have the physical and financial freedom to leave the violent relationship. Without having paid leave, it can be harder for women to flee unsafe relationships. Those who flee have to be able to attend court, a complicated process. They have to find somewhere to live, and often they may need to find a new school for their children, their already distraught children. A woman's right to safety cannot depend on who her employer is. Women need to be given the means to leave safely while knowing that their employment is secure. This bill will enshrine 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave as a workplace right for nearly every worker in Australia. This bill will make sure that paid family and domestic violence leave is included in the National Employment Standards, an historic reform that will help support people, mostly women, but it will help support all people that are escaping abusive relationships. While family violence certainly touches the lives of many Australians, the evidence is, the statistics, is that women are disproportionately impacted and also are disproportionately overrepresented in lower paid, casual and insecure jobs. We know that family and domestic violence devastates the lives and livelihoods of those who directly experience it. For victims of family and domestic violence, their workplace can be a source of much-needed support, but it can also be a place where the perpetrator of the violence can readily target them. The University of New South Wales has reported that 19% of Australian employees experiencing domestic violence reported harassment at their place of work, a place where they are known to be. Just imagine the awful dilemma of somebody who has finally taken the very serious and dangerous step of leaving a violent relationship, knowing that the very next working day, the perpetrator of that violence will know exactly where they are and what site, inside what hours. And not only that, but they will know when they will be leaving that place of work. That is putting a vulnerable victim into an even more vulnerable and dangerous position. If victims of domestic violence don't have access to paid family and domestic violence leave, they won't have the option of not going to work to avoid their perpetrator. And they won't have the ability to take immediate action to have a protection order put in place through the courts to stop the perpetrator from coming to their place of work to harass or threaten them. What a difference it would make to the victim's ability to safely leave that relationship if they know that the next day they will not be in a place where their perpetrator will be able to find them and attempt to control them and put them back into their orbit. That they will be able to take immediate action to put in place a protection order so that the perpetrator will not be able to go to their place of work or to the place where they'll be residing, hopefully safely. These are important but simple things to put in place, but to a woman leaving a violent relationship, it can be the difference between life and death. It is that serious. This legislation would make leaving a violent relationship a little bit easier. And while getting out will still be very hard, this bill will hopefully mean that now there is less of a chance of someone losing their job and their financial security. This bill sends a clear message that family and domestic violence is not just a criminal justice or social issue, but a workplace and economic issue. This bill is a crucial step in combating this crisis and making sure that those experiencing family and domestic violence are financially secure enough to address these challenges. This bill will provide a new workplace right that will more than likely save lives. Earlier this year, the Australian Council of Trade Unions made submissions to the Fair Work Commission's review into the current model that provided workers with 5 days unpaid family and domestic violence leave. The Australian Union Movement was advocating for a variation that entitled employees to 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave. At those hearings, experts from the health, legal and community sectors called for urgent policy changes on behalf of those experiencing family and domestic violence, an issue that has seen a 62% increase in people accessing domestic violence services since the beginning of the pandemic. The Fair Work Commission hearings also heard from frontline workers. Frontline workers gave evidence at hearing after hearing about the absolute necessity of paid family and domestic violence leave, explaining its importance to accessing critical medical, legal, financial, emergency housing, safety planning, relocation and counselling services. Introducing a scheme that provides 2.23 million award-dependent workers with 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave will give those who are vulnerable to violence at home access to the crucial resources they need to stay employed, to stay housed, to stay healthy. Family and domestic violence has far-reaching adverse implications for the victims, including disrupting their working life and lowering their ability to earn a permanent and well-remunerated wage, and then those ripples go out through families and communities. It is for that reason that it is important to legislate for an appropriate amount of paid domestic and family violence leave to be available to all employees, and not just I'm hoping that my wife is not calling me for any particular reason, and not just hope that it will be negotiated in the workplace agreements. The women who need this leave the most will not be in a position to effectively bargain. It is important to recognise that this bill is possible because of the hundreds of thousands of union members, community advocates and activists who stood up and demanded that the government act. This bill comes after more than a decade of tireless campaigning by the union movement, activists and community advocates, which saw them win the inclusion of 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave into collective agreements and then modern awards in May of this year. On average, it can cost up to $18,000 to flee a violent home environment, money that should be spent on kids and keeping a roof over the head. We know that economic security is the primary factor that determines if someone subjected to family and domestic violence remains in, escapes from or returns to a dangerous relationship. What's more, the cost to employers is very low, adding only 4 cents per hour worked. 4 cents per hour worked, or 0.04 cents per hour worked, I beg your pardon. We know that employers already providing 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave through Union 1 collective agreements and also modern award variations are more likely to see greater retention of staff and higher levels of productivity when their employees are able to take paid leave to overcome serious challenges at home, should they arise, and let's hope they never do. However, 1 in 6 women experience domestic and family violence, which extends beyond physical violence and can include emotional abuse, coercion and financial control. This is something that can happen to anyone, any suburb, any job, any stage of their life. The paid leave will be a game changer for working women who are disproportionately affected by family and domestic violence. Paid leave will be a game changer, especially for those who report concern about job security and finances as a major barrier preventing them from fleeing violence. As I mentioned earlier, the average cost to flee is around $18,000. so paid leave is crucial to give impacted workers the time and resources they need. The ACTU President, Michelle O'Neill, has said that, and I quote, "Addressing family and domestic violence is key for closing the gender pay gap, as women who experience violence are more likely to fall behind in their career into low-paid and casual work or out of the workforce entirely." The former government refused to support paid family and domestic violence leave. This is despite women earning less, having less super, facing harassment at work, and who are more likely to be victims of family and domestic violence. These issues worsened during the pandemic, with domestic violence figures surging and sexual assault nearly doubling between 2020 and 2021. Working women already have to rely on annual and personal leave to cover time off for things like looking after children, parents, relatives, and for a range of other reasons. They shouldn't have to factor in the financial consequences of taking unpaid leave in order to be safe. It costs to leave. It costs to leave. That's simple. These costs include setting up new electricity, water, gas accounts, childcare, rent, moving fees, all of those things. New school means new uniform, new books, all that sort of thing. And it takes time searching for properties, packing belongings, attending complicated court hearings, time for talking to counsellors and teachers and making new childcare arrangements. The hidden toll exceeds 10 days of paid leave, but it's the bare minimum to make sure that women aren't further disadvantaged when they're escaping a dangerous situation. Or men. I do recognise that men could be in that same situation. In a country where one woman is murdered by a partner or family member every week, it is indisputable that paid leave could save lives. Across the world, family and domestic violence leave is increasingly becoming discussed and advocated in the context of government and workplace responses to family and domestic violence. While many workplaces are introducing these entitlements into their agreements, only a handful of countries around the world have so far actually legislated for the provision of family domestic violence leave. Interestingly, Deputy Speaker, the first country to legislate for domestic violence leave was the Philippines back in 2004. The Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004 provides for victims of family and domestic violence to take up to 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave. Italy's Jobs Act 2016 provides for employers to take a maximum of 3 months of paid family and domestic violence leave. And, I hate to say it, but even in 2018, New Zealand legislated an entitlement for all employers to take up to 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave, in addition to existing sick and holiday leave entitlements. Canada introduced domestic leave in 2019, and currently most Canadian provinces have also independently legislated for family and domestic violence leave. Not yet legislated in the US, but the Biden administration has made a commitment to it. So Australia is now one of the leading countries to recognise this important workers' entitlement. I do thank all of the people that have advocated tirelessly for this. The actions and advocacy of unions are never for the advancement of the individual alone. Unions act to make changes that benefited everyone. I want to point that out because some people in this building seem to have a fear of unions. Maybe they've never sat down with unions and seen the great changes that they've brought to society. Access to paid family and domestic violence leave saves lives. It saves lives. No worker should ever have to choose between their income and their safety or the safety of their children. And as we welcome in these new rights, it's important that we also commemorate all the lives lost. I won't go through those names, but we all know some of those names, and the people impacted in Australia by family and domestic violence. And I commend the legislation to the Chamber.
Thank you, Member for Moreton. And I call the member for Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I had the great privilege of chairing the Social Policy and Legal Affairs Committee when we undertook an inquiry, a very extensive inquiry that took over 12 months into family, domestic and sexual violence. One of those issues naturally was the issue of whether there should be paid domestic violence leave. And it is, picking up what the member for Moreton said just a few moments ago, fundamentally false that he indicated that members on this side of the House were against setting up a paid family domestic violence leave, because the committee itself actually looked at this issue extensively and made a recommendation that the Fair Work Commission was actually undertaking its inquiry at the time. And there were extensive investigations and inquiries undergoing by Fair Work Commission. And the committee actually left open, it didn't dismiss it, it didn't reject it. It looked at the importance of the issue because it is an important issue. The committee heard extensive evidence. The member for Moreton talked about an average of $18,000. That wasn't correct. That wasn't the figure that the committee heard. The committee heard that it was expenses going up to $18,000. It wasn't an average, it was up to $18,000. You might think I'm playing semantics, but clearly I'm not. The issue of family, domestic and sexual violence is one which this country should hang its head in shame. It is one where we see a woman die at the hands of a partner or a former partner every 8 days. Now, if that was any other type of instance other than family, domestic and sexual violence, Australians would be up in arms. We'd be calling for fundamental legislative changes. I won't go so far as to say there'd be riots in the streets, but there would be a great deal of concern and action. There would be calls for action. I lived and breathed this issue, at least from an academic point of view, when I chaired this committee. And it was one that touched me deeply. I have to say I don't have any personal experience, thank God, in this area, but certainly having worked on this committee and heard the evidence over such a long period of time, it impacted upon me and all of the committee members. Not just one woman dies every 8 days. There are many examples of where men's lives are taken. This is not just an instance of women dying at the hands of men. We know that whilst 1 in 6 women are impacted upon by family, domestic and sexual violence, 1 in 16 men are also impacted upon. Now, clearly there's a disparity between those figures. I'm not suggesting anything other than a great disparity, but quite often we hone in and with a laser-like focus on the impact on women, but we should also be mindful that 1 in 16 men are also impacted by domestic violence. These are Australians. The issue of family, domestic and sexual violence does not discriminate by postcode. It does not discriminate by how much money you have in the bank or how much money you earn. This impacts upon all quarters of life in all areas of Australia. And as I said when I started this speech, it is something that we collectively as Australians should hang our head in shame. The committee which I chaired received over 350 submissions. We gathered over 90 hours of evidence. We made 88 bipartisan recommendations, Deputy Speaker. It was a very significant piece of work. This inquiry formed the shaping of the next national plan to reduce violence against women and children, and I am, for one, very, very proud of the work that we did. The choice between physical and psychological safety versus financial security is an impossible one for victims to make. Many victims of domestic, family and sexual violence feel entrapped. And this goes to the very issue of whether there should be a form or some form of paid leave. No person should feel that they have to continue to live with a person because they can't afford not to, if that relationship is a violent one. We in the committee recommended that the Fair Work Commission review the family violence leave measures that were already in place, which was 5 days of unpaid leave. The committee knew that the Fair Work Commission was undertaking extensive work on this issue. So if there was ever any criticism of the committee as to why it didn't make this decision about the introduction of paid domestic violence leave, it was because the work was already being undertaken extensively by the Fair Work Commission. Now, in their review, the Fair Work Commission ruled that leave should be paid for 10 days for full-time employees and on a pro rata basis for part-time employees. This was what the Fair Work Commission found. It found that leave should be accrued progressively each year, in the same way as personal and carers leave is accrued under the National Employment Standards to a cap of 10 days. It found that leave should be accessible in advance of an entitlement to such leave accruing by agreement with the employee and employer. It found that leave should be paid at the employee's base rate of pay. It found that leave should extend only to those who are experiencing violent, threatening or other abusive behaviour to coerce, control, harm or intimidate an employee by a close relative. It found that this ruling is in line with the Commission's previous ruling under Section 106B of the Fair Work Act. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I support this bill with some caveats. The problem with the bill, as it is currently drafted, is that it goes beyond the recommendations of the Fair Work Commission. The bill, effectively, as drafted, mirrors the recommendations of the ACTU to the Fair Work Commission. So it goes beyond the findings of the Fair Work Commission. Now, we all talk about in this place about the importance of an independent arbiter, an independent umpire, in this case the Fair Work Commission. What this government has done has gone beyond it, and I'll talk about some of the problems with the way that they've addressed this issue. Instead of supporting paid leave at the base rate of pay, as is the custom with other forms of personal leave, and in line with the Fair Work Commission's decision, Labor are promising a rate of pay including bonuses, loadings, allowances, overtime, penalty rates and other incentive-based payments. Now, this is proof that the Labor Party do not understand the way that small business operate. It is proof that the Labor Party don't understand business, full stop. Now, how, I ask you, Madam Deputy Speaker, how is an employer going to calculate the rate of pay when the employer has to take into account bonuses, loadings, allowances, overtime, penalty rates, when those have not been worked, they have not been earned? How do you calculate, for instance, a commission which has not been earned? How do you calculate an overtime that has not been earned. These are things that that other leave provisions do not provide for good reason, because it almost, in fact, makes it unworkable, uncalculable. So I would implore those opposite to, revisit this issue. Sure, you've got the numbers, got that. Politics is a matter of mathematics. But on behalf of small businesses in particular around this country, I would implore those members opposite to really have a good look about how these provisions are actually going to work. I'm not arguing with the merits of the underlying argument. I'm arguing about how the rate of pay is to be calculated. Now, secondly, my second issue is how these calculations or how domestic family violence leave will be paid to casual workers. Now, the Fair Work Commission found that the leave should be paid to full-time and part-time workers. But where you have casual workers, and I know many people would say, well, that's unfair. Why should you put casual workers aside? I get, the fairness argument. But coming back to the calculation argument, how does one calculate the leave entitlements for someone who is a casual worker? Do you, for instance, look at an ordinary month or an ordinary fortnight? I've got 10 days leave. Do you look at an ordinary? Do you calculate it over an average period? The bill is silent about that. So how are those calculations going to be made, Mr Deputy Speaker? I know you're very curious about that, and with good reason. Clearly, what about irregular rosters, irregular work? The whole basis of casual work is irregular. So the Fair Work Commission expressly did not extend it to casuals. Now, the other concern I've got is the upfront accrual of 10 days leave. Labor are proposing that the whole 10 days of leave be accrued on day one of employment. Now, that is totally inconsistent with other forms of leave that are paid. So this is a concern where someone rocks up on day one, starts work, and on day one they've got 10 days. So this is not Andrew Wallace, the member for Fisher, saying this. This is the Fair Work Commission that didn't extend this leave, as important as it is, to the various concerns that I've raised here. And it didn't do it for good reason. So the Labor Party have got a choice. They can box on and march through with their numbers, the iron laws of arithmetic. But I would ask them, on behalf of every small business owner around this country that is ultimately going to have to pay for this, make it workable. Don't just repeat the lines of the ACTU. Respect the umpire's decision, and the umpire is the...
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Corangamon.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm proud to be part of a government that is providing the leadership and the investment to help end family, domestic and sexual violence. Paid family and domestic violence leave is part of that commitment, and it's long overdue. It will also save lives. I've been a passionate advocate for this much-needed legislation for many years. I was proud to be Mayor of the Surf Coast Shire in my region of Victoria when, in 2010, the Council voted to introduce paid family and domestic violence leave for its staff. The agreement was hailed as the world's first and most progressive workplace agreement on family violence. While that was world-leading then, it is now well and truly time that this entitlement applies to all employees in Australia, regardless of their type of employment. Under this bill, more than 11 million Australian workers, including casuals, will have access to 10 days of family-paid domestic violence leave. This change will give workers, who are overwhelmingly women, the means to escape violent situations without risking their job or their financial security. It is a horrific statistic that one woman dies every 10 days at the hands of their former or current partner in Australia. Recent research from Flinders University shows that from the age of 15, around 1 in 4 women has experienced at least one incident of violence by an intimate partner. That sad statistic compares to about 1 in 13 men experiencing similar violence. Police receive a call on average every 2 minutes in Australia relating to family and domestic violence. And there is clear evidence that the prevalence of family and domestic violence has increased with COVID-19. For instance, a Queensland study showed 67% of family and domestic workers reported new clients seeking help for the first time during the COVID crisis. In my home state of Victoria, Sentencing Victoria data shows there were 375,000 applications for family violence intervention orders between 2011 and 2020. And in the Barwon southwest region of the state, which includes my electorate of Corangamite, 25,700 family violence intervention order applications were made over that same period. Sadly, children living in rural and regional Victoria are more than twice as likely to be a respondent to a family violence intervention order. Now, last March, I visited Geelong's Sexual Assault and Family Violence Centre, where I was told there had been a 100% increase in people seeking help, driven in part by the pandemic and lockdowns. The Barwon Community Legal Service, based in Geelong and servicing my electorate, last year said the number of clients experiencing family violence had risen enormously. More than 60% of clients are reporting family violence. It's also telling that women across the nation experiencing family and domestic violence earn on average 35% less than those who don't experience violence. It's an indictment on our society that Indigenous women are 35 times more likely to be hospitalised due to family and domestic violence than non-Indigenous women. Deputy Speaker, this is a serious and systemic problem that must be better addressed. There is no single solution. However, this bill is an important part of that solution. All white workers have a right to be safe at work and safe at home, and no worker should ever have to choose between safety and their income. It's wrong that millions of workers still face that impossible choice. Casual workers are not spared from family and domestic violence. In fact, women who are experiencing family and domestic violence are more likely to be employed in casual or part-time work. We cannot leave them behind. We don't want a system where some workers get paid family violence leave and others don't. It has to apply to everyone. Casual workers are already dealing with the consequences of being in insecure work and able to access other paid leave. Excluding casuals from this legislation would leave 2.6 million without this protection and give employers an incentive to prefer casuals over permanent staff. Unions have fought hard for paid family and domestic violence leave through the Fair Work Commission. And many employers, such as those in the Surf Coast Shire, have already done the right thing and established this entitlement. The government has consulted with business, both through their peak bodies and directly, and has received wide support. Businesses support this. Consultation has also occurred with union states, territories and organisations working to support those impacted by this violence. Evidence heard by the Fair Work Commission found the use of paid family and domestic violence leave schemes is very low. But the important thing is that It is there for people when they need it. The Albanese government is committed to removing barriers for people escaping family and domestic violence in their homes. The government aims to release the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children 2022 to 2033 this year, which would further this important work. The Albanese government has already committed to a range of other new initiatives that will address violence against women and children. These include new investments for an additional 500 community frontline workers, consent and respectful relationships education in schools, start early, safe and affordable housing for women fleeing violence, and a new Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commission. Prior to the election, Labor committed to 7 new community, domestic, family and sexual violence community sector workers in my region, in the Geelong region, including within my electorate of Corangamite. Similar commitments were made elsewhere in the nation. The additional workers will help up to 560 women experiencing violence who might otherwise be turned away. Leaving a violent relationship is the hardest and most dangerous thing that many people will ever do. We know that having a community sector worker there to help makes all the difference. Frontline domestic violence organisations tell us how much more they can do with an extra pair of hands. A single domestic violence caseworker may assist 80 to 100 women and children over the course of a year. 9 years of neglect and disinterest from the former federal government has left many frontline services surviving off the smell of an oily rag. Women in crisis should not be left to fend for themselves. Survivors of domestic and family violence are brave and resilient. They deserve every chance to rebuild their lives and strive for a safer and better future for them and their families. That stark statistic of 1 woman dying in Australia every 10 days at the hands of a current or former partner is totally unacceptable. The National Plan will set out a strategy for the next decade with the aim of greatly reducing domestic and family violence. The government is prioritising this important legislation to increase paid family leave for domestic violence early in its term. That's a clear demonstration of the government's resolve to remove the barriers faced by those escaping violence. The bill seeks to amend the Fair Work Act, introducing the National Employment Standards as entitlements to leave every year. I'm pleased that in addition to introducing 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave, the bill extends the definition of family and domestic violence to include conduct of a member of the employee's household. Importantly, it is also ensuring that casuals will be entitled to access leave at their full rate of pay for the hours they would have worked had they not taken leave. The scheme will start next February for most employees. Small businesses will have an extra 6 months to adjust to the change, so the scheme is expected to be fully operational by August next year. Small businesses are defined in the Fair Work Act of fewer than 15 employees. This is a change that could and should have been made years ago, but the previous government failed to act, even though it had the support of the business community. Those on the opposition benches now have another chance to do the right thing and back this important legislation. Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a government that is moving quickly to deliver on election commitments. I'm especially proud of this bill to deliver on commitments under our Secure Australian Jobs Plan and the Women's Safety Policy. I look back to 2010, when my shire, when I was mayor, introduced this legislation locally, and it came through. I'm so proud that now across the nation, all men and women who deserve this opportunity to take that leave will have that opportunity to hopefully do so. There is no task more important for this parliament than providing support for Australian workers to be safe at home and safe at work. Thank you.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Bowman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is my first opportunity to speak in this chamber, and obviously we've got an important piece of legislation here that we're debating. Family and domestic violence remains a serious and growing problem in Australia. The member for Fisher described it as a great shame on our national situation, and I completely agree with that. The words I'd written down here, Mr Deputy Speaker, was that it is a great scourge affecting every community across Australia. And I think that's a very important point that some of the previous speakers have made, that it's not just the vulnerable communities in Australia, it's not just the remote communities in Australia. This is a scourge that is affecting every community in Australia, and I know every representative here in the House of Representatives will have stories of domestic violence situations that have come through their electorate office doors and sought support. For Australian women over the age of 15, approximately 1 in 4 experience violence by an intimate partner. That is quite a stunning statistic. And of course, there are many male victims of domestic violence as well. But you know, the thought of 1 in 4 women in this country experiencing that is quite a remarkable and sobering statistic. In my own electorate of Bowman, we had our own harrowing story of domestic violence hit the headlines in just the last couple of weeks. I won't go into the details of the matter because it will be before the courts, but needless to say, it brought home the horror of DV and underlined that point that it exists in all corners of Australia's society. This incident occurred in a very quiet suburban cul-de-sac. It's a street I've door-knocked before during the election campaign. It is a lovely, peaceful Bayside street, and it's stunning to think that behind this idyllic scene was a nightmare just behind the door. On average, 1 woman is killed by a current or former partner every 10 days in Australia, another sobering statistic. In my electorate, just down the road from my electorate office in Middle Street, Cleveland, the local Red Rose Foundation and Zonta Club run a vigil every day that one of these incidences occur. And it's an important reminder to our community. It's just a quiet, silent vigil. They hold it out the front of our public library, and just for motorists and pedestrians going past, they get just a gentle reminder that yet another victim of domestic violence has passed here in Australia. Of course, 68% of victims of family or domestic violence are in paid work. And we know that financial security is a significant barrier to victims leaving violent relationships. This is what the experts tell us. Many great organisations in my electorate are working to support victims of domestic violence. I want to just name just a few of them and maybe touch on some of the lessons that they've imparted onto me on this important issue. The Redlands Community Centre offers free crisis counselling with professional, qualified and experienced counsellors, and offers self-help workshops. They've organised referrals to other relevant support organisations and undertake crisis management on behalf of clients. They have emergency workers on hand who present themselves at the centre when someone is experiencing domestic violence. And another one I'd like to mention is that the Centre for Women & Co, who've done just a terrific job in my community dealing with the scourge of DV. They offer trained and experienced DFE specialists providing crisis assessment over the phone or face-to-face, particularly providing advice on information, safety planning and support. And of course, that's such a critical aspect of assisting victims plan for the next steps. And that's what this bill goes to. And they, of course, provide a referral to safe accommodation, of which they've got some within my electorate. The conversations that I have had with the people working on the front line in the DFE space in my community underline the need for holistic support. And of course, critical to this is financial security. For someone to pull back away from a violent relationship, they need financial security, but they need a well-executed plan as to how they're going to get out of this situation and get themselves into a safer circumstance. One of the previous speakers made the point, and I echo it from my conversations with people working in this space, that economic security is the #1 obstacle. The stories they tell me are very harrowing. I'm sure we've all experienced similar stories within our own electorates. But I've certainly, it's certainly my experience and what I've been told by the people on the front line that economic security is that critical key step. And without that, we are going to find their experience, their lived experience is that without that economic security, victims go back into these relationships and the situations escalate even further to the point where we've seen recently in my electorate, as I mentioned before. In 2018, Australia joined only a handful of jurisdictions around the world when the then coalition government legislated to provide family domestic violence leave. The Fair Work Amendment, Family and Domestic Violence Leave Act 2018 currently provides 5 days of unpaid annual FDV leave as part of the National Employment Standards. This leave is available to all employees, including part-time and casual employees, from the day they commence with their employer. The entitlement renews annually, but the unclaimed leave does not carry over to the next year. Contrary to the member for Moreton's contribution earlier, in which the picture was painted that people on the coalition side had not taken any action on this, I pointed to the fact that Australia was one of the first jurisdictions in the world to undertake that legislative change. The Fair Work Commission, of course, since then have commissioned a review of FDV leave entitlements in modern awards, and that began in April 2021. And the findings of the FWC review were handed down on the 16th of May, so just before the federal election, just 5 days before the federal election. The FWC concluded that full-time employees and on a pro rata basis part-time employees should be entitled to 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave per year. Secondly, that the entitlement to 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave per year should accrue progressively across the year in the same way as personal or carers leave accrues under the National Employment Standards. The entitlement should accumulate, the FWC concluded that they should accumulate from year to year, but subject to a caveat whereby the total accrual, of course, doesn't exceed 10 days at any given time. And then the third recommendation was that the paid family and domestic violence leave entitlement should be accessible in advance of an entitlement to such leave accruing by agreement between an employer and an employee. And finally, fourthly, the paid family and domestic violence leave entitlement should operate on the basis that it is paid to the employer's base rate of pay, as defined under Section 16 of the Fair Work Act. So that's where we got to with the review of the Fair Work Commission. Now, the bill that the government has brought forward will amend the existing entitlement so that the national system employees will be entitled to be paid 10 days FDV leave, but the bill also extends the entitlement to casuals and provided the employees are to be paid FDV leave at their full rate of pay rather than just at their base rate of pay. The bill expands the definition of FDV to cover actions by former intimate partners and related household members, and the commencement date has been set for the 1st of February 2023 for employees employed other than by a small business, and then a 6-month extension. The entitlement has a 6-month delayed commencement for national system employees of small businesses, so that would be a start date of the 1st of August 2023. Those dates are actually quite close. It may just be the fact that we've had a federal election in recent months, but I feel that 2022 is slipping away from us very, very quickly, and that the 1st of February 2023 will be here in no time. There won't be much time. There won't be much time for businesses to adapt to this. I note that there is a 6-month extension for smaller businesses, but this is, a fairly significant change, and I think we need to reflect on that. And particularly, I think we need to reflect on that in the current economic climate. Small businesses, big businesses, workers, individual households, they're doing it very tough at the moment. We're facing significant inflation. We've got rising interest rates, of course, another rate rise today. it is a very difficult time to be doing business in Australia. And skill shortages and labour shortages and supply shortages are being felt right across the economy. It is a difficult time to do business. It will be a difficult time to do business between now and the commencement date for this bill, and I think we need to reflect on that. The explanatory memorandum claims that the bill has no financial impact. Of course, that's in reference to the federal government. The intention of the bill is to create an obligation upon employers rather than the federal government providing any support in terms of direct payment for people claiming this leave. Of course, there is no financial impact for the government on this front, but we do have to recognise that this will create some very real cost impositions for business. It is important to note that the former coalition government took a different tack in implementing the original Fair Work Commission decision. Back in December 2018, the former coalition government passed historic legislation enshrining 5 days unpaid family and domestic violence leave in the National Employment Standards. These standards set out 11 minimum employment entitlements to ensure a consistency of entitlements for employees. The former coalition government reforms matched what the decision of the Fair Work Commission was in relation to award-reliant employees. This new entitlement ensured, as far as possible, consistency in entitlements for employees in the national system and reduced complexity for business. And I think that's a critical point. Wherever we can, we should be ensuring that implementation of these things is very consistent for business. I know my time is slipping away, so I'm going to race ahead. Legislating in the National Employment Standards a right to unpaid family and domestic violence leave was an important step and part of the various measures put in place by the former coalition government to support family and domestic violence victims and address this very real issue, which is of great concern to many in my community, in fact everyone in my community. It is important to note the thoroughness of the recent Fair Work Commission review. This was a proper full review. They took on board input and advocacy from a range of unions and employer representative bodies. Submissions were made and hearings were conducted for every single step of the process. The decision and recommendations were reached independently. The Labor government's bill goes beyond the model recommended by the Independent Fair Work Commission and implements many of the claims made by the ACTU during the hearing of the matter. And it's quite concerning that this is going far further than what the Fair Work Commission had recommended, and I think it's critical that we get the balance right. I'll just touch on some of the differences. So the accrual of leave, in relation to the accrual of leave, the Fair Work Commission said that the entitlement to 10 days paid FDV leave per year should accrue progressively during the year of service in the same way that personal leave is accrued. The entitlement should accumulate from year to year, but subject to a cap whereby the total accrual will not exceed 10 days. This is to ensure that someone who starts a new job doesn't instantly have 10 days of liability, and it will have the effect of operating as a phasing-in mechanism for the entitlement over the first 12 months. The extension to casual employees, that's another point that some of the other speakers have raised, so I'm not going to touch on that. But in terms of the rate of pay, I think it's important to note the distinction. The Fair Work Commission asked for it to be applied to the base rate of pay. This bill seeks to have it applied to the full rate of pay. There are many different groups who've offered their opinions on the legislation, many different business groups who've essentially recommended that we go back to the Fair Work Commission's recommendation, including ACCI, the AI Group and COSBOA. Look, the cruel impact of family and domestic violence on victims and their dependents is a national tragedy, and it is a tragedy that we must fix through education, positive role models, criminal prosecution and social and workplace support. The former coalition government recognised the importance of this problem when in 2018 they became one of the first governments in the world to act in this regard. What is clear, Deputy Speaker, is that both the original legislation and the Fair Work Commission recommendations all show a profound determination to provide effective and sustainable support for victims of FDV. Under the provisions of this bill, I think it's under the provisions of the bills, the issue needs to be worked through. I think we need to get back to where the
member's time has expired. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Cowan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm actually very privileged to stand here today to speak in support of this bill, and I'm incredibly honoured to be part of a government to pass such an important bill, important for so many women out there. And rather than get into the technicalities of the bill in the time that I have here, I'd like just to ask the indulgence of people present here and those watching to just grant me a little bit of indulgence. And I'm going to ask you for a minute just to imagine. I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself at the shopping centre, doing your weekly shopping, or maybe you're grabbing something for dinner that night because it's your turn to cook, which in my household is every night it's my turn to cook. And you've got your trolley and you're pushing it down the aisle. And just across there, you see a woman dressed in a nurse's outfit. She's carrying a basket. She's grabbing a few items as she goes along. Obviously, she's got a list that she's working from, and obviously, she's in a hurry. Coming around the corner, you see another woman, a mum with 2 children, a 2-year-old who's starting to throw a little bit of a tantrum, and a 1-year-old in the trolley. They're getting fairly restless. It's that time of the day for them when they really want to just go home and have their dinner and be put down to bed. And she's got a little bit of a frown and trying to figure out how she's going to wrangle it all. Moving on to the next aisle, you see a woman, perhaps a bit of an older woman. Perhaps she's retired, perhaps she's still working, and she's standing there looking at the myriad of pasta choices, wondering which pasta to get. I've been there, there's why so much choice in pasta, and yet people still insist on making their own. And then down the way a little bit, you see another woman coming along, and she's got her heels on and she's dressed in a business suit, and she too has a list and a basket, and she's just grabbing things off the shelf. Obviously, she knows exactly what she's cooking for dinner. Now I want you to pick one of those women. Any one of them. Pick one of those women. And imagine that woman is going home to a partner that she is absolutely terrified of. Imagine that she's going to go home. She doesn't know that she picked the right pasta. Because if she picked the wrong pasta, there'll be hell to pay. Imagine that she's going to go home and that child still hasn't settled. And if she hasn't settled the child by then, there's going to be hell to pay. Imagine that she's going to go home and she doesn't know if she's going to make it through the night again without a bruise or a broken wrist or a broken arm or a black eye. Because that's the statistics. 1 in 4 women, any woman, 1 in 4 women that you walk past in the shopping centre is going home to a place that is not safe. And then when she gets the courage and when she gets the ability and when she gets the capacity to leave, to finally leave, she knows she's going to live in poverty. She knows that she might have to lose her job. She knows that she's going to have to find someone to look after her kids. She knows that she's also going to have to show up to work every day. She's got to get her mortgage sorted out. She's got to find a place to rent. She's got to get her bank finances sorted out. She's got to do shopping. She's got to furnish a house. She's got to furnish an apartment if she can find an apartment. Perhaps she's got to go to a refuge and spend time in a refuge just to be able to be safe. I've been there, and I've been absolutely honoured by having so many women come and share their stories of being there with me. When you leave, when you finally leave, and I say finally because it takes more than one go, many women go back again and again and again, and they go back again and again and again because they have no place to go. They have no financial security. They're forced back to their abusers. They're forced back to the perpetrators of violence. They need time. They need the time to get their affairs in order, to have some stability for themselves and, if they have children, for the children, who are often with the woman who has had to leave a violent home, a violent situation, an unsafe home. So when I stood up here and I said I'm privileged to speak about this, because there was a time in my life when I couldn't even have imagined being able to speak about this topic. There was a time in my life when I couldn't even have imagined that we here in this place would be passing such a bill, would be recognising exactly what is needed to support, to help, to assist women and men, but primarily women, who are leaving violent situations. And there are many of them out there, my friends. You just don't know. You just don't know who they are. I remember the first time I spoke about my story, and it was at a professional women's gathering. And the number of women who were teachers, who were doctors, who were lawyers, who came to me and shared their stories with me would absolutely blow your mind. 68% of women who are escaping family and domestic violence are employed in some form or other. 68% of those women have to go to work the next day. 68% of those women, if they're in casual work, have to forego a day's work and a day's salary in order to be able to rent a place, furnish a place, sort out their finances, go to court, get a restraining order, seek a lawyer, or just take the time that they need to look after their own well-being and the well-being of their children if they have children with them. This is a good bill. This is a bill that we can all come together and support. Yeah, I know that there are some concerns. How are the businesses going to afford it? But let me tell you this. If you have ever had to stand in front of your boss and say, hey, I might have to go to a refuge tonight, and have the response from him say, well, are you going to make it into work tomorrow? Okay. Then you would know just how important this bill is. You would have no reservations whatsoever in supporting this bill. If you ever had to find a place to live and furnish that place and get your kids off to school, or maybe even change their schooling, change their place of school, go to a court, get a restraining order. If you ever had to do those things, you would know how time-consuming it is, and you would know what kind of support you need to be able to do that when you're coming out of trauma and when you're still in trauma. So, Mr. Speaker, I said I didn't want to get into the technicalities of this bill, but just to make a plea to everyone here about how important this bill is. From all of the women with lived experience, and on behalf of all the women with lived experience who I've met, who I've had the absolute honour of meeting over the years, how much this bill means to them. How much it means to them that we are standing in this place talking about this. Okay. Talking about a way to support them out of family and domestic violence. Okay. The situation hasn't changed since 30 years, in the 30 years that I've been a survivor, right? Hasn't changed. The numbers are still up there. We still count dead women. We're still counting dead women. Anything that we can do, any measure that we can make to help women get out of family and domestic violence, support them, wrap around them and wrap around their children as we're doing this. Any measure will go a long way to making that statistic, that startling statistic of how many women die every week, how many women are living with family and domestic violence. Anything that we can do to make that statistic lower, to support women, is a good thing. It's a good thing. So, Mr Speaker, in closing, I commend this bill to the House. I think I've made that pretty clear, that I commend this bill to the House. I feel very passionately about this bill. I think I've made that pretty clear too. And I implore every member of this House to think about it. Think about that woman at the shopping centre. You might not know her, but in passing this bill, you can make a difference to her life.
And I acknowledge the contribution by the member Cowan. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Every 2 minutes in Australia, police are called to a domestic and family violence matter. These are our neighbours, our friends and our workmates. Since the age of 15, approximately 1 in 4 women have experienced violence by an intimate partner. These are our besties, these are our mothers, these are our daughters and their teenaged friends. These are me, these are you. First Nations women are at least 32 times more likely to be hospitalised due to family and domestic violence than non-Indigenous women. On average, 1 woman is killed by her current or former partner every 10 days in this country. Family and domestic violence can be physical, sexual or emotional, and it can affect anyone, no matter their gender. However, it affects women most severely. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics Recorded Crime Victims 2021, more than a quarter of homicides nationally were family and domestic violence related, and most of the victims were women. Without adequate support, women have been made to bear the physical, emotional and financial cost of being trapped in a cycle of abuse and control at home with no way out. Family and domestic violence carries health, welfare and social consequences which reach into every aspect of a victim's life. And I'd like to take a moment to note the work of the amazing organisation Impact for Women that supports women and families through such trauma with clothes and household items in my electorate of Goldstein. There are many economic consequences. Violence against women and their children has been estimated to cost Australia $26 billion a year. These costs relate to health services, criminal justice processes and lost productivity. While domestic and family violence largely occurs outside the workplace, its impact reaches into the workplace. More than 68% of people experiencing family and domestic violence are in paid work. Many of them can't leave violent situations without risking joblessness, financial stress, homelessness and poverty. This is why paid family and domestic violence leave is so critical. As the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations said in July, no employee should be forced to make a choice between urging a wage and protecting the safety of themselves and their families. While I acknowledge the concerns of small businesses, both inside and outside of my electorate, submissions to the Victorian Royal Commission into Family and Domestic Violence made it clear that financial security is a significant protective factor in victims gaining freedom from abusive partners. To gain that freedom, victim survivors need time off work to access legal appointments, find a new house, find a new school, attend court, move, be available to meet tradies, to install safety measures and change financial accounts. Support for victim survivors in their workplace is critical during the relationship separation phase. The 2021 Playing Our Part report by the Champions of Change Coalition cited that it takes on average 7 to 8 attempts to leave a relationship and around $18,000 and 141 hours for a person to extricate themselves from that abusive relationship. Victim survivors who are economically dependent on their perpetrator are more likely to remain in that relationship. The more financial independence a victim survivor has, the more likely they are to be able to leave. In the Monash University 2021 survey and interviews with victim survivors, conducted as part of the Fair Work Commission's review of domestic and family violence leave provisions, victim survivors described the importance of paid domestic violence leave. I just needed some time to get myself together. my headspace, get some treatments, just to see where I am today. I just couldn't believe what was happening to me because it was a number of assaults. It was just awful. If I didn't have access to leave, I would have lost my job. I would have lost everything. I don't know if I would have survived. Paid family violence leave was my lifeline. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate according to postcode, culture, education or workplace. I've spoken to women in my electorate of Goldstein who are trapped in violent relationships, too frightened to leave, too financially controlled to leave. As the member for Cowan said, these women are all around us. Whether a person is employed on a full-time basis in a well-paid secure job or in casual precarious employment, the consequences of living with violence are not diminished. I commend this government for introducing its Fair Work Amendment Paid Family and Domestic Violence Leave Bill and for extending this leave, importantly, to part-time and casual workers. In February 2022, 22.8% of Australian employees, or around 2.6 million, were casuals, with female employees overrepresented in casual employment. The bill provides for the rate of pay for family and domestic violence leave to be calculated at an employee's full rate of pay, and I also strongly support this provision in the bill. No one should be financially disadvantaged because they're leaving a violent relationship. We also know that perpetrators may have access to and indeed monitor their victim's bank account, so a reduction in a worker's pay could be a red flag to the perpetrator and put the victim at further risk of violence. Paid leave will save lives and help vulnerable employees escape dangerous situations. It will allow women the opportunity to plan to leave, to take action to leave, and support them after they choose to leave. But the effectiveness of the leave policy depends upon a safe and supportive workplace culture where employees feel comfortable to seek help at work. The administration and operation of this leave policy is just as critical as the existence of the legislation itself. Employers and managers can't be expected to become family and domestic violence counsellors or experts, especially those in small business that don't have HR departments. They can, however, ensure that the workplace has policies and procedures in place to support workers who are experiencing family and domestic violence. Small businesses must be supported in this, and I will continue to engage with those in my electorate regarding the transition to the implementation of these measures. Critical to a worker's safety is the ability to recognise the signs of domestic violence and refer workers to domestic violence services for expert advice and resources. This sort of whole-of-workplace training must become a priority under the next national plan to end violence against women and children. Because, as others have noted, this bill is only one part of the framework. The bigger picture is the national plan. We must get this right, and it's urgent. The next national plan must have adequate funding, clearer actions and targets, and a well-chosen and properly resourced new Family and Sexual Violence Commission and Commissioner who can ensure proper evaluation and accountability, which was so sorely lacking in the first national plan. The previous plan failed to achieve the single target it set for itself to see a significant and sustained reduction in violence against women and children during the next 12 years, from 2010 to 2022. In that time, rates of domestic violence have been stable and rates of sexual violence have actually increased. Here are some of the key elements that must be embedded into that plan. We need genuine bipartisan commitment and funding to shift away from short-term band-aid solutions towards longer-term funding cycles. There can be no improvement in women's safety, whatever the new plan's final form, unless it is backed by significant investment. We need to address the structural drivers of family, domestic and sexual violence, in particular gender inequality. Gender inequality is a social condition characterised by unequal value afforded to men and women, and an unequal distribution of power, resources and opportunity between them. Power and control are at the core of all acts of domestic and family violence, and occur in an environment of gender inequality. Gendered violence will only be truly addressed when Australian women are equal to men. We need primary prevention and education, campaigns that build awareness of the support services available to victim survivors of family and domestic violence and how to access them. We need education on safe, healthy and respectful relationships embedded into early childhood education settings more consistently. Violence against women is a national emergency. As Australian feminist and writer Anne Summers said in her recent column, "It is not poverty that causes domestic violence, as is often thought. It is the other way round. Violence causes poverty. And it is the realisation that makes so many women remain in violent relationships. What kind of society forces women into such an intolerable situation? Until women have equality in all sectors of society, and until they're safe inside and outside of their homes, we must apply a gendered lens to all policies and legislation." Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for Goldstein for her fine speech. Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to have the opportunity to speak on this bill, the Fair Work Amendment Paid Family and Domestic Violence Leave Bill 2022, and I'm proud to be a member of a government that cares about workers, about women and about the right of every worker to a safe home, community and workplace. This bill before us delivers on one of the key commitments Labor made at the federal election to legislate for 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave for full-time, part-time and casual employees. We will get straight to the job of fixing the failures of the previous government and delivering on the commitments we made during the 2022 federal election. Deputy Speaker, all workers in Australia have the right to be safe at work and safe at home. No worker should ever have to choose between their safety and their income. It is unacceptable that millions of workers in Australia still face this impossible choice. We know that family and domestic violence is ubiquitous and disproportionately affects women who are more likely to be casual or part-time. We also know that leaving an abuser is the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence. Maintaining financial security is critical, as is providing adequate time for victims to deal with the many matters that need to be dealt with for them to take the steps to leave a situation of abuse. It's time-consuming, it's emotionally draining, and those matters need to be taken into consideration. In leaving abuse or violence, women incur significant time and financial costs, including finding a new place to live, seeking legal support, receiving medical treatment, enrolling the children in a new school, for example. Deputy Speaker, the facts set out by the Fair Work Commission in its recent review are harrowing. Since the age of 15, approximately 1 in 4 women has experienced at least one incident of violence by an intimate partner, as well as 1 in 13 men. Indigenous women are 35 times as likely to be hospitalised due to family and domestic violence than non-Indigenous women. On average, 1 woman is killed by her current or former partner every 10 days in Australia. This is just an absolutely devastating state of affairs. In Tasmania, calls to police regarding family violence have steadily increased each year since 2014. It's getting worse, not better. Currently, police receive up to 9 calls on average related to domestic violence every single day. Last month, during state budget estimates, Tasmania Police advised that as of March 31, there had been 3,077 family violence incidents reported to police. Unfortunately, the prevalence of family and domestic violence has increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Commissioner for Children and Young People in Tasmania has reported that some perpetrators exploited the restrictions on movement and stay-at-home orders imposed during the early stages of the pandemic in Tasmania to intensify their family violence, especially through further isolating women from friends, family or colleagues, or indeed workmates. Indeed, a Queensland study showed 67% of family domestic violence services reported new clients seeking their help for the first time during the COVID-19 crisis. As well as the personal and social cost of family and domestic violence, there is also a financial impact and a cost to business. Of people experiencing family and domestic violence, 68% are in paid work. Women experiencing family and domestic violence earn 35% less than those who do not. The impact of FDV costs employers up to $2 billion a year. This legislation before us today will help reduce these costs by reducing absenteeism, reducing turnover of employees, and improve the understanding and management of family and domestic violence by employers. And that shouldn't be understated, Deputy Speaker. The more that managers and employers can learn about the impacts of this on their employees, they have to confront this now as a workplace issue. I think that will help things, and it helps them be more empathetic to the workers who are going through this. Looking more broadly, KPMG estimates that the total cost to the Australian economy of violence against women and their children sits at around $22 billion per year. In his testimony to the Fair Work Commission on this matter, Dr Jim Stanford, Director for the Centre for Future Work, estimated that the ultimate impact of 10 days paid family domestic violence leave on total labour costs in the Australian economy. He found that the final impact of this provision on total labour costs was almost too small to measure, equivalent to an increase of labour costs of 1/60th of 1%, not even enough to be visible in aggregate economic data. These costs are easily outweighed by the economic benefits of reducing the incidence of FTV, let alone the social benefits. So the economic costs, Deputy Speaker, are negligible, too small even to contemplate, but the benefits are manifest. Our legislation extends the Fair Work Commission's recent preliminary review by introducing a right to 10 days paid leave for all eligible employees covered by the National Employment Standards, including rostered casuals. Leave is particularly necessary for casual employees who are already dealing with the consequences of being in insecure work and unable to access other paid leave. Excluding casuals altogether would leave 2.6 million employees, more than 20% of all employees, without this protection, and provide further incentive for employers to prefer casuals over permanent job holders. The other key difference in our proposal from the Commission's preliminary review is that payment for leave will be at the employee's full rate of pay, as opposed to the bare rate minimum that applies under the NES for other paid leave entitlements. This departure is also critical to meet our policy objective of minimising, to the greatest extent possible, the damage and disruption to a person's life and economic security caused by family and domestic violence. We have also extended the definition of family and domestic violence to include conduct of a member of an employee's household, to recognise that Australians are living in more diverse and different arrangements. The new entitlement will take effect on 1st of February 2023 for businesses other than small business, fewer than 15 employees, and on the 1st of August 2023 for small business in recognition that they have limited human resource and payroll capabilities. And, Deputy Speaker, I've spent the last couple of minutes talking about the economics of this, but to me that's not the main game. The main game is the social and human impact of this change. It recognises that women in workplaces, they need this support. It's been too long in coming. It would be great to have it come in sooner than it is, but at least we're making headway now. Deputy Speaker, this also goes to women's safety issues, just briefly, that the Labor Party articulated at the last election. We're going to establish a new Family, Domestic and Sexual Violence Commissioner. We're going to fund 500 new community sector workers. We're going to invest $77 million to help make sure all Australian school students are able to access high-quality, age-appropriate, consent and respectful relationships education. We will work with states and territories to strengthen and harmonise laws relating to sexual assault and consent. And we will deliver a separate national plan for First Nations people to end violence against women and family violence because of those horrendous rates among Indigenous women. We will support justice reinvestment in First Nations communities with a $79 million investment to reduce incarceration rates, including early intervention to reduce family violence. And it has to be said, we will deliver more safe and affordable housing, helping women and children fleeing violence. 1.6 million to be spent to build 4,000 new social housing properties specifically allocated for women and children fleeing domestic and family violence, and 100 million to be allocated for crisis and transitional housing options for women and children fleeing domestic and family violence and older women on low incomes who are at risk of homelessness. Deputy Speaker, violence against women and their children is a crime and a fundamental breach of human rights. Every Australian deserves to live free from violence. The Albanese Labor government is providing the leadership and investment needed to help end family, domestic and sexual violence, and it starts with this bill. I commend the bill to the House. Thank you.
I thank the member for Lyons. The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to support an increase in the domestic and family violence leave entitlement for victim survivors of family and domestic violence leave from 5 to 10 days each year. It is irrefutable that the rate of family and domestic violence is growing in our country, and there is an urgent need for our communities to help when we can. Prior to coming to this place, I met twice with the Women's Roundtable from Kooyong. They pressed upon me the importance of this leave entitlement. They spoke of research which supported its implementation and acknowledged the unfortunate prevalence of domestic violence in and around Kooyong. In most cases, the victims of family violence are women and children. The data tells us that from the age of 15, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 13 men have experienced intimate partner violence. Women in rural areas are 24 times more likely to be hospitalised than women in the cities. We must implement whatever measures we can to support people who are experiencing family violence. Academic research shows that on average it takes 7 or 8 attempts to leave a violent relationship. It also comes at a significant financial cost. On average it takes more than 140 hours. This process of extrication, which is statistically the most dangerous period for women and their children who are fleeing violence, cannot simply occur out of work hours. About 68% of people who are experiencing family violence are in paid work. Many are unable to escape violence without the risk of losing their job, experiencing financial stress. This can often result in homelessness and long-term poverty. Unpaid leave may not help. Some women are in a financial position to take unpaid leave. Most are not. Furthermore, experts warn that any unexpected pause in income from unpaid leave can be a flag to an abuser. This is another reason why it's crucial that a person's paid work is maintained throughout the period of leaving a violent partner, and later too as they start to recover or begin the process of court hearings or counselling. During this difficult and often dangerous time, support from the workplace is critical. No worker should ever have to choose between their safety and their income. I also support the minimisation of barriers to obtaining this leave. It's still a highly stigmatised subject for many, although it is to be hoped that measures such as this one will help in the process of destigmatisation. Importantly, I hope that employers will start from a place of reasonable belief and of recognition of the bravery of those who come forward. We do not want people failing to ask for help because of the difficulties in providing proof of their abuse. This bill is one of those special reforms that, while members and senators in this place will pass with the Parliament, belongs to the advocates who fought for it. People fleeing domestic violence and abuse will be afforded 10 days of paid leave because of the persistence, the dedication and the courage of survivors of violence who have worked very hard so that no one else will have to go through what they did.
I thank the member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time.
Deputy Speaker, I'm just waiting on a speaker, but I'm more than happy to... Would you like me to jump or would you like me to forego and give the next speaker across the aisle
Let me just consult with the clerk.
Thanks. Is Miss Daniels next? Oh, hang on. We might have our person here. She's here. Lovely. Thank you. She's just arrived. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Bendigo.
Apologies, Chamber and Chair, for being a few minutes late. Family violence, we know, can affect anyone. We know that it is not class-based. We know that it is not culturally based. We know from the statistics that one woman every 10 days loses her life to family violence. And we know we need to be doing more as a country and as a government to be helping these women, and quite often their children. It's a situation that many of us in this place know of an example. We know of someone who may have lost their life, or who's gone through the tough, or is going through the tough decision about what to do. Whether they be a loved one, whether they be a family member, whether they be a neighbour, a work colleague, whether they be somebody in our community, everybody knows somebody who has been a victim or a survivor of family violence. And we say this with a heavy heart because we also know that this bill that's before us has come too late for too many women. This bill has come too late for women who may have survived but have the scars. This bill has come too late for children who carry the experience of their growing up with them. This bill that is before us replaces the current entitlement in the National Employment Standard of 5 days of unpaid family and domestic violence leave in a 12-month period to 10 days of paid leave for full-time, part-time and casual employees. It also extends the definition of family and domestic violence to include current and former intimate partners of an employee and members of an employee household. When the Minister introduced this bill into the Parliament, he explained in great detail why it was necessary that we extend this entitlement to a broader group of employees than other entitlements have done so. Casual employees aren't entitled to sick leave currently. The reason why this bill goes further than any other workplace entitlement is because family violence doesn't distinguish on employment status. You can be somebody wanting to leave an abusive relationship, whether you're full-time, part-time or casual. That is why it is so important that this bill include casual workers. More than 11 million Australian workers, including casuals, will have access to 10 paid family and domestic violence leave under this legislation. Casual workers are not spared from family and domestic violence. In fact, women who are experiencing family and domestic violence are more likely to be employed in casual work. And we cannot leave them behind. That is why it is a universal entitlement. It is needed. This is a historical step that we as a Parliament are making, and it will change lives of women experiencing family violence. It will save lives. And those who say that aren't romanticising, aren't celebrating, aren't glorifying what this bill will do. It will literally save lives because it will give women pay and time and an opportunity to have a conversation with their employer about why they need time off to deal with what is happening in their lives. Far too often do we hear afterwards testimony from family and friends. Why didn't she let me know? Why didn't she speak up? Why didn't she just leave? For far too many women, their reason not to leave is a financial one. They can't afford to lose that day of pay. They've run out of leave if they're entitled to leave. They just can't see a way out. Whilst this is not the silver bullet, it is one tool, it is one way that we're hoping that we can help women who make that decision to leave an abusive relationship. Paid family and domestic violence leave is part of our commitment that we are standing here to make together, hopefully as a parliament, to provide the leadership and investment that we need to support families and to help end the hideous cycle of family and domestic and sexual violence. Paid family and domestic violence leave is a long overdue change. And I do want to acknowledge that in my time since being here, this is an issue that the parliament and that in particular opposition we did take seriously and did work constructively on. We did support the 5 days of unpaid leave when it was first introduced by the previous government, and at that time called for it to be paid, because we know that that very few can actually afford to give that day up if they need that money to pay for rent, to pay for bills. This gives women the opportunity, these 10 days, to attend court, to change schools for their child if they need to spend a day with their kids, to work with them what's going through and happening, to attend counselling, to do whatever they need to do to get themselves to a safe place where they can feel safe from violence, where they can start to slowly rebuild their life after the experience that they've had. And we talk a lot about it being women, because it nearly always is. Yes, there are a few incidences where it's men who are victims of family and domestic violence, but it's nearly always women. They're the statistics. And children. And children in these relationships who either bear witness or are themselves victims of violence. This is why this reform is so necessary and long overdue. This change will give workers, overwhelmingly women, the means to escape violent situations without risk of losing their jobs or financial security. I can remember having a conversation with a woman in my electorate shortly after I was elected. She'd fled Melbourne to central Victoria and was staying with friends. She was still making the tough commute back to Melbourne to work. She was worried that her former partner would turn up to work and was struggling to have the conversation with her son about why they were staying for an extra long period with their friends. She eventually ran out of her leave entitlement and eventually had to quit her job because she just couldn't continue the commute. She was leaving the area to move somewhere else because she was struggling to get access to accommodation. She felt embarrassed about the idea of turning up to work not being able to have a shower if she was forced to live out of a car. She felt embarrassed to have the conversation with her work colleagues about what she was going through because she thought that so many of them were good friends with her former partner. These are the thoughts, these are the ideas, these are the real conversations that women are having each and every day. This entitlement now makes it law and gives them the opportunity to have leave, to ask for leave. Yes, there is a big support package that needs to go with this, an education piece for our employers and for women and for work colleagues to have around why this entitlement is necessary, to encourage women to ask for it if they need it, and to encourage employers to support women who need it. But it is having the entitlement there legislated in the first place means we're halfway there. Another example, a small business in my electorate who reached out. They knew that one of their workers was a victim of family violence and they wanted to do all they could to help her and said, what can we do? We don't know who to turn to. This person is an invaluable employee. We can see them burning through their leave. We know she needs help and we don't know what to do. At that stage, there was no entitlement for unpaid leave. There was no one in Fair Work or an organisation for this business to turn to for support. They had to wing it alone. And it shouldn't be that way. If we are going to be serious about ending the systemic and endemic or pandemic that we have of women being victims of family and domestic violence. We have to normalise the conversation and give employers the tools, as well as women, that opportunity to support their workers in these situations. The good news is for this proactive employer was that they did get help from the Centre of Non-Violence, which is based in my electorate, who quickly worked out a great plan. They did give this woman, this particular employee of theirs, who they said ran the place. She ran the books, she ran the diary, she was invaluable to them. They did everything they could to keep her on. And today, they are all stronger than ever. And I really want to congratulate this business and other businesses and employers who have done the right thing and reached out, because it is a tough time. It's a tough time for anyone who knows someone that they care about who's going through family and domestic violence, how to support them. And quite often you don't know the best way to help them. And so that is why seeing the leadership from this business has really struck with me. And I hope that more businesses, once this bill becomes enacted, are able to do the same, that this gives them the opportunity to understand how they can better support their employees. Following consultation with business, the government has determined that the schedule will commence from February 1, 2013 for most employees. Small businesses will have an extra 6 months to adjust to the change, meaning the scheme will be fully operational in August of next year. This is a change that could have been made years ago, but wasn't. Even though it had the support of the business community and would have easily passed the parliament, it's taken this parliament. It is up to us, the 47th parliament, to make this a reality. The campaign began long ago, and I do want to acknowledge the efforts of the ASU, the Australian Services Union, and the civil society organisations, the community sector, for campaigning around this. They did not give up. They wanted to see 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave enshrined in our national employment standards so that every worker who needed this entitlement could access it. The very first family violence leave enforceable instrument anywhere in the world was negotiated by the ASU VicTas branch into the 2010 Surf Coast Shire Agreement. And I want to acknowledge the member for Corangamite, who was the mayor at the time. Leadership from the employer, the Surf Coast Shire Council, and leadership from the union, who fought for that entitlement to be in the agreement. That is where we work best. The reason why this is so significant of what the ASU and the civil society members did, in many cases they weren't fighting for this entitlement for themselves, which is what usually happens in union campaigns, but they're fighting for this entitlement for every worker in every workplace. That is why it deserves recognising their campaign, We Won't Wait. What else needs to be done? And as I said, this is just one of many things, many initiatives that we need to do if we are going to stop the endless cycle of family and domestic violence. As I've been speaking, we know from the stats, in the 12 minutes that I've been speaking, the police have already been called out 6 times. Every 2 minutes, the police are called out to an incident of family and domestic violence. We do need to be supporting our frontline workers. We need to make sure that they've got the skills and that there's enough of them to be supporting women who are fleeing family violence. Our government has also announced an additional 500 frontline community workers, funding for consent and respectful relationship education in schools, safe and affordable housing for women fleeing family violence, including more accommodation to be built in my electorate, and a new Domestic and Family and Sexual Violence Commission. This is just the beginning. We know that this has to be a partnership, a compact and commitment, not just from our government, but from state governments, from local governments, from every employer, from every organisation, that we work together so that in a generation's time, these horrible statistics are still not a reality. If we want to support women leave, we need to do so with every tool and every opportunity we have. We do not want to be here in a generation's time talking about the lost generation of women, one every 10 days, losing their lives to family and domestic violence, and their children and family members who are left behind to pick up the pieces.
I thank the member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Indi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations to your elevation to the Speaker's panel. The Fair Work Amendment Paid Family and Domestic Violence Leave Bill will provide all employees covered by the National Employment Standards with 10 days paid leave at their full rate of pay if they're experiencing family or domestic violence. It expands the definition of family and domestic violence to cover actions by former intimate partners and unrelated household members. It also extends the entitlement to those who are employed on a casual basis and delays its implementation for employees of small businesses in order to give those employers more time to be ready for those changes. Important. I welcome this legislation. Family and domestic violence is an epidemic in our society, and this is just one of many measures government must take to address an issue that leaves a wide and deep scar across the lives of too many people, predominantly women and children. Family violence is the leading preventable contributor of death and disability in women aged 15 to 45 years, and it's the biggest contributor to women's ill health. It's also the largest driver of homelessness for women and results in a police call-out on average, unbelievably, once every 2 minutes across Australia. Extraordinary. Throughout my clinical career, I met countless women experiencing family violence, and that's not surprising because 1 in 6 Australian women has experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or previous partner. As a midwife, I screened for intimate partner violence, and this was an important evidence-based intervention because it's estimated that around 15% of women who report abuse report that abuse started or worsened during pregnancy. Again, a shocking revelation. The rate of family violence in the biggest towns of my electorate of Indi is staggering. Women in Wodonga and Wangaratta experience family violence at a rate 33% higher than the Victorian average, and in Benalla it's 76% higher. Those numbers are hard to fathom, but they represent thousands of women who I represent and who I wish to use this platform to assist in any way we as legislators can. Of course, this change won't solve family and domestic violence. It's just one piece in the puzzle, and I hope to see much more from the government on the prevention end of this scourge, and I welcome what I heard from the member for Bendigo just now about the prevention space. For someone experiencing family and domestic violence, this leave could make what previously seemed impossible, possible. Attending a doctor's appointment, attending an antenatal check, attending hospital, going to the police, appearing in court, an appointment with a counsellor, with a lawyer, going to the bank, opening a new account, going to an inspection for a new rental to start a new life. Previously, a victim of family violence may have felt those tasks to be out of their reach because they couldn't afford to miss work. Leaving their relationship may have already seemed an insurmountable task because of the huge financial cost involved. This goes some way to lightening that load. But this just is the beginning. Family violence can have long-term impacts on health, well-being, education, relationships, and so importantly, the mental health of women and their children, long-term impacts. Making this leave available isn't just about doing the right thing for women in the most vulnerable times of their life. It also makes sound economic sense to make paid leave available to those experiencing family and domestic violence because that violence is having a seriously negative effect on our economy. In 2015, PricewaterhouseCoopers calculated the broad economic costs of violence against women from their partners to a total of $12.6 billion per year. I note that the Australian Industry Group has aired concerns about the cost this will place on employers, believing it to be too much of an impost. But employers are already paying the cost of domestic violence through absenteeism and lost productivity. Making this leave available will help good employees who, through no fault of their own, are experiencing domestic and family violence. At the most recent Jobs and Skills Summit last week, much was said about increasing women's participation in the workforce, about reducing barriers to participation. And this is just one of the ways in which we can assist women to stay in the workforce, to ensure their own economic security as they respond to the violence they're experiencing. While this is welcome, I do know for some employers it will be a challenge. There are many good employers across my electorate who want to do the right thing by their employees, who want to be fair and support them when they're experiencing family violence. The CEO of COSBOA, Alexi Boyd, made the very important point that many small businesses have treated these situations with compassion and generosity, but they're not experts in handling trauma. So while we are really welcoming this measure, we must also ensure that there's education and support for the small businesses especially. Implementing this reform must be simple and it must not cause unnecessary red tape for employers, and especially not for victims of violence. We mustn't create another barrier in the effort to remove one for those experiencing family and domestic violence. This is a great first step, but it must not be the last step. I look forward to seeing many more bills coming into this House to address the scourge of family and domestic violence, to see funding for primary prevention, for education and support services, strategies which focus on changing behaviour and, crucially, the structural, cultural and societal contexts that target underlying causes such as gender inequality and poverty. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to close by acknowledging the work of the incredible people across my electorate of Indi who work in this very difficult space. Women's Health Goulburn North East, Gateway Health, our GPs, our social workers, our nurses, our midwives and our emergency department staff, caseworkers across Indi. Thank you for your work, and I thank the government for this important bill.
I thank the member for Indi, and I call the member for Paterson.
Deputy Speaker, I move that the debate now be adjourned.
Thank you. It being... And I call for a seconder. Thank you, the member for Longman. The ayes have it. It being 6:30, the debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. And I call the clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 2, grievance debate.
And I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to point to the increase in eating disorders in my electorate of Goldstein and nationally. In the south-east region of Melbourne, the Alfred Child and Youth Mental Health Service, the Australian Research Council and Monash Hospital, as well as private clinics, estimate prevalence at being almost 1 in 9 adolescents, mainly girls between the ages of 12 to 17 years. Some even estimate that in my Bayside electorate, it could be as high as 1 in 7, depending on their individual cohorts. That's potentially 3 in every classroom. Anecdotally, I hear stories of girls not eating their school lunch and adolescents sneering at their peers for eating bread. While eating disorders were on the rise prior to COVID-19, the pandemic has heightened the situation and the predisposing risk factors, specifically social isolation, lack of structure, pausing of sport and recreation, food insecurity, disruption of daily activities, fear of contagion, heightened family stress, decreased structure around eating, and increased use of screens for schooling and social interaction. Statistics are hard to come by, but we do know that the prevalence of all types of eating disorders has increased significantly, almost doubling during the pandemic in some age categories. The most accurate statistics we have were collected prior to COVID-19, and it's highly probable, based on the number of referrals clinicians specialising in this field have received over the last 2 to 3 years, that they present a flattering picture. The number of people in Australia with an eating disorder at any given time is estimated to be around 1 million, or approximately 4% of the population. Eating disorders, when combined with disordered eating together, are estimated to affect 16.3% of the Australian population. Eating disorders have been on the rise for a decade, and experts in the field attribute this to what they call anxiety-provoking media, which promotes unrealistic and modified images, especially on social media. They say the increase in social media exposure at a young age, 10 years and up, and a range of socio-cultural and demographic issues, idealised thinness, have increased the prevalence of disordered eating and eating disorders. Females tend to have 4 times the risk factor of developing disordered eating around puberty than males. This is occurring on our school grounds as much as it is in the home. In Goldstein, we've seen the incidence of body dissatisfaction increase drastically over the last 5 years. Experts say that clusters of disordered eating are occurring within school groups at particular year levels and within particular school environments. A lot of these are from higher socio-economic environments, but not exclusively so. Recently, in some cohorts of 15 to 20 people, experts say we've seen almost 50% of the social group develop disordered eating or engage in some form of restrictive eating. Academic pressure from schools and social pressure also affect restrictive practices that trigger disordered eating. Adolescents can feel out of control in their home and school environments and need something to create a sense of reward and control managing their eating, and reducing calories is one way to achieve this. In addition, Deputy Speaker, I've been advised by a local paediatric dietitian and nutritionist that there is a common trend among students at senior schools in Goldstein right now to not eat lunch, or to at least eliminate all bread or carbs in particular. Many adolescents are competing with one another on social platforms like TikTok on who can consume the least amount of calories within a day or a week. Comparisons within peers are also being made on MyFitnessPal. Often parents and teachers are oblivious to this. This is a disturbing snapshot. We have to do something. And this brings me to the treatments that are currently available. There are 2 main ways to seek treatment for eating disorders publicly and privately. The public system is based mainly on someone presenting with medical instability who needs urgent medical care. Specialist ED wards are set up in most major hospitals to stabilise and re-nourish sufferers as quickly as possible. They're largely not geared to equip patients or families with support on how to continue to treat and support the patient when discharged. Patients and families can feel like they're left in the deep end with no support, and so begins the merry-go-round of in-out admissions, often lasting years. This creates whole-of-family impact, affecting the mental health of parents and other children, affecting work and school, and draining finances. One mother in my electorate is herself on medication for depression and anxiety. She told me she's left her job to feed her daughter, and the family may yet have to sell the family home to fund private treatment. This is a dire and hidden example of the impact of eating disorders and the lack of effective programs in communities. Day programs like the Butterfly program have been set up to help support the public system and to allow access to specialised intensive group-based support. But wait lists are long and group support is not adaptable. It's a great program, but it only supports the patient for 12 weeks. After that, they're told to maintain weight markers and try to stay well. The follow-up is limited. The Alfred Child and Youth Mental Health Service also offers a specialist support system, but almost exclusively with a family-based treatment model. Family-based treatment is based almost entirely on weight restoration without psychological or behavioural support. And the feedback is that it's a bit of a one-size-fits-all model of treatment. Service providers in Goldstein are trying to do the best with what they have under a very under-resourced system. Privately, there are a select few who specialise exclusively in eating disorders, and some private clinicians feel overwhelmed with trying to manage conflicting issues that they're often not trained to deal with. It's critical that multidisciplinary teams are formed in the private setting to help with the effects of eating disorders. Carers can be left with the responsibility of connecting clinicians, which is time-consuming, expensive and frequently ineffective. Additionally, wait lists have skyrocketed during the pandemic, and most carers and patients are told they'll have to wait months to see a specialist. So what do we need to do to fix the system? We need funding to be directed to the vulnerable and at-risk populations, and we need multidisciplinary eating disorder-specific clinics. We need education and resources to be properly rolled out in schools, not just a one-off session with Eating Disorders Victoria on body image in Year 10. We need dietitians and psychologists employed into schools in high-risk populations. Wellbeing coordinators should not be expected to carry this burden. We need a task force to be set up now to create a nation-first eating disorder hub, a one-stop shop for prevention, treatment, management, family carer support and relapse prevention. A hub would promote primary prevention by funding experienced clinicians, dietitians and psychologists to educate and inform teachers and parents with children entering transitional stages on what red flags to be aware of. Reduce the waiting time to access specialist treatment, increase the effectiveness of routine treatment with continuous monitoring, like we have for type 1 diabetes. Increase support for families. Eating disorder treatment is expensive. The time to treat effectively is estimated at 3 years minimum, which is why recovery and relapse is common. We have an opportunity post-COVID to get on top of this life-destroying condition and stop the rise before it becomes more of an epidemic than it is. Eating disorders and disordered eating are becoming the norm among some cohorts in my electorate, and there are families in Goldstein willing to offer their own time and resources to make a hub become a reality. They don't want others to feel lost in the system, isolated, alone, and without any way of getting the treatment they need. I am seeking state and federal collaboration to create an environment where our children grow up accepting and liking themselves, where families and carers feel connected and safe, and where eating disorders do not reach the predicted 1 in 5 in the next 5 years. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member. The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Wednesday, the 31st of August, the Robertson team and I hosted the Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum. This forum brought together the region's leaders and representatives from areas of business, areas of unions, government, industry and education in order to discuss the challenges that face the labour market and the issues that face jobs and skills on the Central Coast. This forum corresponded with the Albanese Labor Government's National Jobs and Skills Summit, which concluded at the end of last week. That summit similarly heard from businesses, unions, industry and government leaders and representatives from across Australia. The Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum took place in Gosford, the major city of our region. It was an incredibly productive meeting where stakeholders discussed the major challenges of our region and possible solutions to overcome these challenges. Some key points and information about the Central Coast labour market conveyed at the forum included that on the Central Coast, according to the latest data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the region's largest employer is healthcare and social assistance, representing approximately 18% of the total employed persons in the region. This was followed by retail trade, construction, education and training, professional, scientific and technical services and manufacturing, thus showcasing the diverse industry across our magnificent region. Within these key employment categories, women are represented in greater numbers in comparison to men in health and social assistance sectors and within education and training. However, within manufacturing and construction, there are a greater number of males. Further, the business community was well represented at our Jobs and Skills Forum. The small and medium-sized business community is a major employer on the Central Coast and an engine room of our local economy. The data states that construction represents the highest number of businesses registered at just over 6,000, followed by professional, scientific and technical services at 3,200, and rental, hiring and real estate services at 2,300. These categories represent the greatest number of businesses in my region on the Central Coast. Also of note is that 15% of the total employed population on the Central Coast hold multiple jobs. Education was also a major factor at our Jobs and Skills Forum on the Central Coast, as it is right across Australia. By way of background, just over 41% of the Central Coast population does not have any post-high school qualification, and only 14% hold a bachelor's degree. Further, there are 24% of Central Coast residents holding a vocational qualification. What these figures demonstrated at the forum and demonstrated to us tonight, is that these are all areas where all levels of government can work together to address and improve employment and education outcomes on the Central Coast region. This was exactly the purpose of the Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum, to identify the challenges and the opportunities in our region and to work on the solutions to make the Central Coast stronger and better prepared for the future. This is the better future that the Australian public voted for at the 2022 federal election. The Albanese Labor government is determined to ensure Australians are never held back and never left behind. And I am proud to be part of a government that has already demonstrated its commitment to incentivising in education and training services that will ensure more Australians can achieve success and realise their full potential. Our government, our Labor government, recently announced, following the National Jobs and Skills Summit, that it will provide up to 180,000 fee-free TAFE positions across Australia. An important message that also came out of the Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum was the cost of education, were barriers to education. This will incentivise Australians to undertake courses in areas of shortage and areas of national priority. Further, the Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum identified a range of other issues that are inhibiting the labour market in our region. These are a few of the key issues discussed. Further, a common theme from the forum was that there needed to be a better relationship between education and between industry. Many businesses mentioned that they had apprenticeships available, yet could not secure employees for these positions. I'm proud to be part of an Albanese Labor government that is removing the barriers to vocational education, like TAFE, and ensuring younger and ensuring older workers have access to fee-free TAFE courses, especially in areas of skill shortage and national priority. TAFE has always been a place to train. TAFE has always been a place to retrain. And when financial barriers are removed, this allows equity and this allows access. And these are the principles that underpin and have guided the Australian Labor Party since its inception, and which now guide the Albanese government. The government will also invest just over $480 million to deliver up to 20,000 extra university places, making it easier for Australians to find a spot at university and to get a job. These measures will help address the skills shortages in vital industries across the country and will mean stronger connections between education sectors and industry sectors. And this is all part of a comprehensive education package that will remediate a decade of neglect by the former government. Another big issue that was raised at our Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum was the state of our local road infrastructure. Our local road infrastructure is in a state of disrepair. And when these discussions were had at the forum on the Central Coast, and when comparisons were made to nearby cities like Sydney, Many stakeholders mentioned that it takes longer for residents to get from point A to point B on the Central Coast than it does to get from Sydney to Newcastle. And this is holding back the region's prosperity. To ensure that the Central Coast can attract more business, to ensure that the Central Coast can attract more industry, we need to support the infrastructure that will promote business and industry growth and support the workers travelling to and from their place of employment. I'm pleased to be part of a government that will take action to improve the infrastructure on the Central Coast by investing in key transport routes, including in Kincumber with the Avoca Drive upgrade and our $40 million local roads package. Of course, more can always be done to improve infrastructure and transport options, and this will be a priority of mine over the course of this term of government, working with the Albanese Labor government, working with the state government in New South Wales and working with local government in the Central Coast region in order to achieve these outcomes. Moreover, the City of Gosford represents a huge opportunity for job creation and economic growth. Many stakeholders from the forum understood that Gosford needs greater investment to ensure it becomes and attracts people to the destination for business, for education and training, tourism, nightlife, the arts and a livable city. We need to finally unlock the potential that is the Gosford waterfront and imagine a place that welcomes everyone and showcases the magnificence of the natural beauty of the surrounding area. We must ensure we provide support for the arts with links to the First Nations community and a history of the area. The Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum was a complete success. We brought together business, we brought together unions, government, we identified challenges, we identified opportunities and the solutions that can solve many of the issues holding the Central Coast back while maximising our region's strengths. The information provided at our forum will be submitted to the federal government's employment white paper, and I encourage Central Coast residents to get in touch with my office if they would like to make a submission. I want to thank each and every participant at the Central Coast Jobs and Skills Forum. Your contributions on that day, your contributions on that day and into the future will help shape a better future for the Central Coast region. Thank you.
I thank the member for Robertson. The question is that grievance has been noted, and I call the member for Nichols.
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I rise to talk about skills shortages in Australia, and particular shortages in agriculture. In my electorate of Nichols sits one of Australia's great food bowls. Our great horticultural industry, also, over 90% of Australia's pears are grown in Nichols, and our horticultural industry also produces a significant proportion of Australia's apples and many other fruits and vegetables. Dairy is another critical industry, which in Nichols produces close to $1 billion worth of milk annually. Now, there are no second chances in agriculture. If cows can't be milked twice daily, there's no milk. If the fruit crop isn't harvested at optimal ripeness, it rots on the trees. Supply to the many food processors in Nichols is dependent on our farms having ready access to willing workers to provide the raw materials. There is growing concern and frustration in Nichols about the scarcity of workers and the failure of the Labor government to act decisively. The farmers of Nichols didn't need a skills summit, they didn't need hot air, they need workers and they need them now. The leader of the Nationals, David Littleproud, attended the summit. He rolled up his sleeves and was as he often does, and was constructive, and I congratulate him for doing so. The Nationals were there because regional Australia needed a strong voice, and we are the strongest voice for regional Australia. So, what were the immediate outcomes? A lift in the permanent migration program ceiling to 195,000 in 22-23 to help ease widespread critical workforce shortages, with 9,000 of the additional places for the regions, but it is not enough. It's a drop in the ocean. I welcome the opportunity for more people to come to Australia and settle in the regions. Nichols has a long and proud history of welcoming people from all parts of the globe. Migration is part of the success story in Nichols, including in agriculture. The downside post-summit is that the jobs and skills needed in Nichols are still needed today, in many cases desperately needed. The Nationals have a solution, a dedicated agricultural visa, but in its wisdom, the Albanese government's decided not to back it to the required extent. The Pacific Australia Labor Mobility, or PALM scheme, has been successful in providing seasonal workers in horticulture, but this does not appear to be a culturally appropriate fit for the dairy industry. Instead, the dairy industry must navigate the 482 temporary skills shortage visa and the designated area migration agreement for Nichols, and both currently have shortcomings that need to be addressed. The 482 visa has no pathway to permanent residence for those employed on dairy farms, and while workers from the Philippines are culturally suited and enjoy and do very well at the dairy work, half of them fail the English test. Capable workers with functional spoken English and comprehension are being excluded based on written English skills, and employers are concerned the bar is set too high for the unskilled workers they require and would indeed welcome with open arms. There is a pressing need for additional unskilled labour categories in the designated area migration agreement for dairy workers. This would allow dairies to train and upskill their own workers. The Age newspaper on August 30 carried the story of Nabi Bakiri, who estimates that he could employ another 50 workers on his Goulburn Valley orchards he desperately needs. Now, Mr Bakari said he arrived in Melbourne in 2004 and he struggled to find work, so he moved to Shepparton to pick fruit. And this is a quote from Mr Bakiri. "I picked everything: pears, apples, peaches, nectarines, plums. There was no need for English or a driver's licence," he said. This is typical of Nichols, where agriculture creates opportunity, something I spoke passionately about in my maiden speech. The Food Supply Chain Alliance calculated that the national food supply chain is short at least 172 workers from paddock to plate. 172,000 workers that are needed to prevent prolonged higher food prices for consumers, and reduced food availability will continue through 2022 and beyond. This is an issue that impacts all Australians, not just the farmers who desperately need workers to harvest. Quite rightly, the Food Supply Chain Alliance determined that this is one of the few cost of living pressures that the government can influence, and it should be a priority. Regional Australia can look forward to welcoming a wave of migrant workers from Vietnam, with the Minister for Agriculture confirming the government will honour the Australian Agricultural Visa Agreement, an agreement put in place by the Nationals. The Nationals have been calling for further clarification on this arrangement, and it is pleasing that the Minister has reaffirmed that the Vietnam agreement will be honoured. There remains an opportunity for more countries to participate in the visa. The Philippines, which, as I said, is a preferred country for dairy farmers in Nichols to recruit workers. The Australian Workers' Union ran a campaign against the Ag visa. They talked of systematic exploitation and abuse of migrant workers on Australian farms, suggesting that exploitation has become part of the business model. Now, try telling that to John McKay from Rose Landscaping Services, who is currently setting up a new tree-growing operation in the heart of Nichols. Just last week, I stood in the paddock with John, and he told me his most valued employees from Nepal. And after more than a decade since arriving as an unskilled migrant, he's now running part of the operation. The company is expanding and they need to recruit workers. They can't find them locally and they're looking overseas, but the options are limited. They need an easier pathway. They need an Ag visa. The AWU scaremongering is equally hollow when you visit dairy farmers, where Filipino workers are not only employed on the farms, but they and their families are embraced by the small towns, including Nathalia, where these communities are thriving. There is genuine concern in Nichols that without proactive changes specifically targeting the dairy sector, the workforce gaps will continue to widen, affecting productivity, economic output and exports. The Vietnam visa is a welcome step, but there is more that can and should be done to address the urgent workforce shortages in agriculture. We need an ag visa. Thank you.
I thank the member for Nichols. The question is that grievance has been noted, and I call the member for Pearce. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to speak on the Albanese Labor Government's recent Jobs and Skills Summit held here in Parliament House, Canberra. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Ngunnawal people. I also pay respect to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional custodians of my electorate in Perth. Throughout the period of the federal election, it was clear to see that Australians want their government to focus on building a better future, to focus on the best interests of our communities. We held our incredibly successful Jobs and Skills Summit last week, 100 days in government, and this summit was all about one thing: bringing people together to confront the big challenges in our economy and also in our society. We know that there is a genuine priority for some real movement and real discussions about our economic challenges. That is why there were over 100 workshops in Parliament House during the summit, in addition to many roundtables and consultations conducted around Australia in the lead-up to the federal summit. This summit exceeded everyone's expectations and gave us solid, secure, tangible outcomes to make the lives of every Australian better. Working with industry, unions and other stakeholders at the summit, the Albanese government has agreed to 36 immediate initiatives, including, but not limited to, $1 billion in joint federal-state funding for fee-free TAFE in 2023, plus an additional 180,000 places. A one-off income credit, so aged pensioners who want to work can earn an additional $4,000 over this financial year without losing any of their pension. More flexibility using $575 million in the National Housing Infrastructure Facility to invest in social and affordable housing and attract financing from superannuation funds and other sources of private capital. Modernising Australia's workplace relation laws, including to make bargaining accessible for all workers and businesses. Amending the Fair Work Act to strengthen access to flexible working arrangements, making unpaid parental leave more flexible, and strengthen protection for workers against discrimination and harassment. Improving access to jobs and training pathways for women, First Nations people, regional Australians and culturally and linguistically diverse people, including equity targets for training places, 1,000 digital apprenticeships in the Australian Public Service, and other measures to reduce barriers to employment. An increase in the permanent migration programme ceiling to 195,000 in 2022 to 2023 to help ease widespread critical workforce shortages, and extending visas and relaxing work restrictions on international students to strengthen the pipeline of skilled labour and providing additional funding to resolve the visa backlog. All ideas put forward will be explored over the next 12 months as part of the Employment White Paper, with the terms of reference to be released later this month. We are making real change. Locally, in my seat of Pearce, I felt it important to give my community a voice and input into this historical summit. That is why I and many other Labour MPs and senators held our own jobs and skills roundtables to directly feed into the federal summit, to give our local communities an opportunity to have that strong, reliable voice. At our local roundtable, I invited a plethora of community leaders, representatives and spokespeople, including representatives from our First Nations community, TAFE, university, small business owners, farmers, growers, state government members and local government representatives, local business representatives, cultural leaders and manufacturers. We are fortunate in Pearce to have a pool of extremely talented, intellectual and well-respected leaders. It would be a grave oversight to not engage these particular members of our community at this time. Our roundtable achieved 5 main outcomes, which in turn informed the Albanese Government Federal Summit, with some issues being directly mirrored across the country and subsequently actioned at the Federal Summit. These include 1. Visa and immigration processing. Our local Trans Farm representatives stated that the current visa processing times and immigration barriers, especially over COVID-19, has hindered their staffing levels. B. Sectors such as the farming sector rely heavily on overseas workers to provide support and manual labour to their businesses. C. Western Australia is a great host for skilled and unskilled labour. As such, it is imperative that these workers are provided with a simple yet effective immigration process. 2. A focus on the type of working visas. A. Some employees are just looking to come to Australia for a short period of time, but the benchmarks are high in terms of English language, skills and financial requirements. B. Industries such as hospitality and farming rely on overseas employees. Banara nurseries in Pearce predominantly hire people on a part-time or permanent basis. However, most backpackers opt to work casually and leave after a short period of time. For these specific industries, this means that business owners are unable to invest in training. 3. Ability to complete CVs and job applications. We are a multicultural community in Australia, and in Pearce, 41% of our community were born overseas. We are home to some extremely motivated and intelligent people, yet English may not be their first language. As such, these people need help in preparing resumes and also support to complete relevant documentation. Engaging the untapped potential of our youth. We have a wonderful First Nations community in Pearce, but we must understand that they also need support. If young people are not engaging in school, there may be ways as a community that we can help them to succeed. It is important that young people have the skills they need to seek employment. But further, if young people are employed in ongoing work but cannot see a clear pathway to grow, then they may defer their attention elsewhere. Getting these conversations going is important, and I'm extremely proud that this particular group of young people were well represented at my roundtable. Measuring and understanding productivity was another point. Questions were asked about the way in which we measure productivity and how this has changed over the pandemic. Are we adapting the way we view and measure productivity in the workforce as the world changes? All of these points raised were met with incredibly respectful and interested discussions, with some points being presented with possible solutions from other representatives within the group. It is imperative that these discussions do continue, and while we know our Skills Summit has many great outcomes for our country, we also know that the hard work starts now. I will continue to meet with these groups and engage the Pearce community, and I look forward to experiencing and applauding the progressive and positive change as a result of these much-needed important discussions. I'm mindful that the people who are around the table at our local summit are incredibly busy people. They took the time to spend around the table with us to make sure that we had informed advice based on experience, knowledge and wisdom, and I absolutely applaud them for spending the time with us and sharing that knowledge and hoping that they hope to achieve a better outcome for our community and for Australia. Thank you.
Thank you. And the question is that the grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak about the Queensland health crisis, specifically the issues the Gladstone Hospital faces. Most women look forward to the birth of their baby with feelings of anticipation as well as excitement. But for many women in the wider Gladstone region, this excitement is tempered with feelings of anxiety and fear. This is follows the Gladstone Hospital's maternity unit being on bypass since July 8 and the gradual decline of other medical services. For many years, the provision of medical services in rural Queensland has become less and less, so much so that even basic services such as giving birth at the Gladstone Hospital is not being met. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Gladstone Hospital serves a regional city of 60,000 people and surrounding towns including Biloela. The maternity unit delivers about 600 babies a year. It is the only hospital available to expectant mothers after the Queensland Labor government bought the former Mater Hospital and incorporated it into the public facility in 2020. I released a petition on August 18 drawing attention to the decline in the availability of maternity and other medical services at the Gladstone Hospital and the negative impact this has had on the wider Gladstone region and surrounding areas. The petition calls for the Premier, the Honourable Anastasia Palaszczuk, and Health Minister, the Honourable Yvette D'Arth, to provide adequate funding, resources and qualified medical professionals to the Gladstone Hospital to deliver maternity and other medical services. So far, the petition has been signed by over 2,000 people from across central Queensland, including expectant mothers and their concerned family and friends. I've been inundated with stories of pregnant women that at the last minute had to be bypassed and travel 90 minutes down the road to give birth to their child at the Rockhampton Hospital. Recently, ABC Capricornia covered the story of a Biloela couple, Marina Duran and Victor Villamil. The couple had planned to have their baby Camille at the Gladstone Hospital. After Mrs Duran developed gestational diabetes and they opted for a maternity unit with obstetricians on the staff. They booked accommodation close to the Gladstone Hospital and everything seemed to be running to plan. When they visited the day before their baby was due, Madam Deputy Speaker, when Mrs Duran went into labour, she was told that they would not be able to assist in the delivery and that she would need to go to Rockhampton. Mrs Duran and Mr Villamil left to discuss their options but had to return to the hospital due to being in too much pain in their car. Mrs Duran was eventually offered transport to Rockhampton by an ambulance but had to wait more than an hour for paramedics to arrive. I have been also contacted by numerous staff in the Gladstone Hospital with concerns that the maternity unit is going to be closed for some time but are too worried to speak out about it because of fear of losing their jobs. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is simply unacceptable that mothers should have to run the risk of giving birth on the side of a highway, especially on the side of a highway that is substandard and littered with safety hazards, including many potholes. Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is all part of the ongoing health debacle in Queensland that the Labor government is not addressing and is something that they do not want to address. It seems that their policy of centralising health care to hospitals like Rockhampton and to Brisbane has added to the demise of basic health care to outlying communities such as Biloela. Unfortunately, many towns in the Flynn electorate are experiencing similar problems, and as are many regional communities across Queensland. Earlier this year, I met with Dr Richard Tan, who is a long-time GP with over 50 years servicing the Biloela community and the hospital. We discussed the health needs of the region and the need for routine CT scans carried out in the Biloela area. With the amount of time that the Biloela ambulance spends travelling to Rockhampton and to Gladstone for routine CT scans, it would be beneficial for the community and the patients to investigate the potential for having this service at the Biloela Hospital. Figures received from Queensland Health Minister show that the number of hospital patients who are transported to Rockhampton and Gladstone hospitals are more than one per day, with 46 transfers on average per month. These figures do not include the number of private patients who also travel our roads to seek routine scans in Rockhampton and Gladstone hospitals. We also need to consider the paramedics, the hospital staff, the drivers of the ambulance and the ramping at the Rockhampton Hospital when they arrive. This means that Biloela is basically down an ambulance and at least 2 staff members for a full day every day. The Central Queensland Health and Hospital Services says that Biloela does not have enough need for their own CT unit due to the way these numbers are reported. How many private people travel to Rockhampton or Gladstone during the week to have a CT scan? With an ambulance ramping reaching 56% at Rockhampton last year, we cannot afford for our hard-working paramedics and our ambulance staff to be sitting at the Rockhampton or Gladstone hospitals waiting for routine CT scans. The benefits to our patients and our communities, as well as taking pressure off health system in larger hospitals, should be plenty of incentive for Queensland Health to make this happen. This trend is becoming extremely clear that our regional communities continue to suffer under the Queensland Labor government's health policies. Madam Deputy Speaker, Cabinet Minister and Member for Gladstone, the Honourable Glenn Butcher, is part of a government that is introducing world's highest royalty rates in the coal industry in the world, and yet cannot even provide resources for a Gladstone hospital that needs to deliver maternity services and CT scanners in Biloela. They do not realise how much GDP comes from the Gladstone region and from central Queensland. Mr Butcher and the Queensland Government have become feckless and indolent. They should focus their attention on regional Queensland by delivering solutions to return maternity and other medical services to the Gladstone Hospital as soon as possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, as the federal member for Flynn, it is my duty to apply pressure on the Queensland Government to provide adequate health services in regional Queensland, including by restoring maternity services to the Gladstone Hospital as soon as possible. The current situation would not be acceptable in Brisbane and should not be acceptable in Gladstone. My Gladstone Hospital petition is on my website and I encourage Central Queensland residents to sign it. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to quote an important statement from Dr. Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can assure you and the Gladstone regional residents that I will not become silent until the Gladstone Hospital maternity unit is restored to its full functional capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. And the question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Within the past 2 weeks, I've seen two incredible milestones within the Lingiari electorate, two significant achievements that is important for me to reflect on in this place. The first is the 56th anniversary of the Gurindji Walk-Off, and the second being the 40th anniversary of the Aboriginal Land Rights Northern Territory Act, one historic movement sparking another. This year, similar to most, we celebrated and commemorated the festival on Gurindji country. This day marks the 9-year struggle that saw Vincent Lingiari, the Gurindji, Mudpara and Warlpiri people bravely stand up to power and win their land back. I want to take a moment to reflect on the story of Vincent Lingiari, my electorate's namesake. It was a story of struggle, of determination and of an unshakable commitment to justice for the Gurindji mob and for all our people. Tired of being underpaid, tired of being forced to work for a rich man on his own country, tired of seeing his people treated unjustly, Vincent Lingiari made a stand. He walked off Wave Hill Cattle Station, refusing to work and leading his people down a humble creek bed. In this creek bed, Vincent Lingiari and the Gurindji mob stayed. 8 long years they camped, carrying a huge weight on their shoulders. The mighty trade union movement, who attended the Freedom Day festival in force, had worked for many years to support the Gurindji people, certainly during that struggle, visiting many times to drop off food and shelter. After 8 long years, finally justice came. Labor's Prime Minister Gough Whitlam arrived on Gurindji country to hand back Gurindji to their traditional owners. Many of you, no doubt, are well and truly acquainted with the legendary stories and photos of Gough Whitlam pouring sand into old man Lingiari's hands. But the story of Lingiari and the Gurindji people do not stop there. It was no simple happy ending for the Gurindji mob, who had to fight hard to keep their country, losing the cattle station and forced to continue their fight for justice. This story is a powerful one this country needs to hear more of. The Gurindji Festival celebrates, which I was honoured to be and attend alongside Senator Pat Dodson. It was a 3-day festival of culture, music, art, sport and lectures looking at the history, but also what we can learn into the future. It was the Wayfield Walk-Off, which the Freedom Day celebrates. That led to the establishment of the Northern Territory's Aboriginal Land Rights Act. It helped create the 4 great land councils of the Northern Territory. That's Northern Land Council, Central Land Council, and Diliaqua and Tiwi. These land councils are intrinsically connected to and representative of our communities out bush. They all came together at Kalkaringi. The land councils play an enormous role in the Territory and indeed across the country. I want to thank those land council members for allowing both Senator Dodson and myself to attend their executive meeting. The Executive Council members from all regions discussed a range of topics affecting Aboriginal people in our communities, including the Uluru Statement of the Heart and a voice to Parliament, a Northern Territory treaty, housing. There are many concerns throughout the whole discussion, both urban and remote, and the drift from our remote communities into our urban centres and the impact into particularly some of the town camps that have been happening. Voter enrolment was certainly front and centre of a lot of the discussion. The urgent need to invest in our homelands was at the forefront, and when they were talking about child protection and safety, homelands are certainly an important part of this process. This government hears our land councils loud and clear, and I will work tirelessly to help and support their agenda. This was the first joint land council meeting in almost 20 years. You could feel the strength of the meeting as we all come together. I hope it's not another 20 years till we feel that again. And I know, having been involved in the Northern Land Council over the last 3 years prior to my election into this parliament, it was, and despite the efforts of the former Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt, I think he was part of a government that really didn't want to look at solutions on the ground in those communities. So I think he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. But it is certainly great to be part of a Labor government that hears those messages and that we can look at some of those solutions. A lot of the delegates talked about CDP, and I want to take a moment to also thank Minister Burney, who held before the Jobs Summit a gathering of a lot of the CDP and job providers before the Jobs Summit, which the outcomes from the CDP got mutual obligations and how it might work in remote communities was fed into the Jobs Summit. So we're certainly looking forward to looking at how we can work within this government, but also with those communities to try and get outcomes for Aboriginal people in a lot of those communities. It was also a privilege to be in the crowd to listen to the words of Thomas Mayer, a proud Torres Strait Islander man born on Larrakia country and a strong champion of the Uluru Statement of the Heart. Thomas spoke strong words during the Vincent Lingiari lecture at Kalkaringi, and he called on all Australians to have the courage to walk with our first Australians in the journey towards the voice to Parliament. Because the sad reality is that the battles that Vincent Lingiari faced for justice nearly 60 years ago are the same battles we are fighting today. These battles look a little different. Our country and our world is a much different place. But at the root of these battles, the issues are the same. The lack of a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, the lack of autonomy in decision-making. In his address, Thomas spoke about the institutions that have come before us, tasked with representing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the national level. Thomas said, and I quote, "From the Australian Aboriginal Progressive Association in the 1920s, which was silenced through the brutal intimidation by authorities who had complete control over our lives, through the Aboriginal Advancement League, the NAC, the NACC, the FAAA ATSI, to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, or ATSIC, which was established in 1988. All of them split up, ignored, defunded and destroyed." Let those words sink in. At every stage that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have sought to amplify our voice to gain control of our lives and our communities, we have been set back. An invitation to walk with First Peoples of this country was a gift through the Uluru Statement of the Heart, and I'm proud to be part of a government who has committed to starting that process. It was not about setting our First Peoples apart. It was not about some hierarchy of people at its core. It was about how we move forward and come together. To the people of Kalkaringi, the Gurindji, to the 4 land councils, and particularly to Thomas Mayer, who I've quoted in this speech, and to who all attended, I thank you, and I will certainly make sure that as the member for Lingiari, I advocate strongly for all of your aspirations that had been talked to both Senator Dodson and I. And it was a special moment for me and for so many others who attended this great festival. Thank you.
I thank the member for Lingiari for her contribution, and there being no further grievances, the debate is now adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting. And I give the call to the member for Werribee.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the Federation Chamber do now adjourn. I second the motion.
Thank you. So the question is that the motion be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. And on that note, the Federation Chamber now stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you.